Before there were kingdoms, before crowns, castles, or written history, humanity lived in a world almost impossible to imagine today. Vast forests covered the land, forgotten tribes crossed untamed continents, and the first great ideas that would shape civilization were only beginning to emerge. But what was the world really like before the first kings claimed their thrones? Tonight, we'll journey back to an age where survival was the only law, and every discovery changed the future forever. If you enjoy exploring ancient mysteries and the hidden origins of civilization, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the archive Lost to History, and let's uncover the world before kingdoms existed. The ground remembers a time before crowns, long before banners rise above fortified walls, before scribes press royal names into wet clay, before armies march behind the symbols of kings. There is a quieter human world, spread across forests, grasslands, river valleys, deserts that are not yet deserts, and coastlines that no longer exist. It is not empty. It is not simple. It is not waiting for civilization to begin. It is alive with footsteps, fires, songs, stone blades, buried bones, seasonal camps, painted shelters, and paths known so well that no map is needed. The people who live in this world do not think of themselves as prehistoric. They do not stand at the beginning of a story whose ending is empire. They live inside a complete universe of weather animals, kin, danger, memory, and obligation. No throne commands them. No palace stores their grain. No border marks where one realm ends and another begins. Yet the world is already full of rules, already heavy with meaning, already shaped by choices that will echo for thousands of years. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Because the most mysterious part of the ancient past is not always the monument that survives, or the city that vanishes, or the king whose name has been broken from a tablet. Sometimes the deeper mystery is what existed before anyone needed a king at all. To imagine the world before kingdoms, it is necessary to let go of the neat outlines that later history teaches so easily. There is no Egypt yet, though the Nile already floods and withdraws with a rhythm older than memory. There is no Sumer yet, though the rivers of Mesopotamia already wander through marshes, channels, and flat alluvial land. There is no China, no Minoan palace, no Indus city, no written law code, no royal tombs stacked with treasure. But there are people along those rivers. There are people in the hills beyond them. There are people crossing open plains, fishing in estuaries, following herds, digging roots, gathering shellfish, watching the stars, and returning to the same places across generations. Their world is not organized by the names later civilizations will give to it. It is organized by waterstone firewood migration routes, edible plants, dangerous animals, remembered deaths and stories, tied to particular bends in rivers or cliffs above seasonal camps. In this older world, power exists, but it does not yet look like monarchy. Some people know where flint can be found. Some understand the movements of reindeer, gazelle, wild cattle, or red deer better than others. Some know how to heal a wound, shape a blade, calm a dispute, prepare hides, read weather in the smell of the wind, or remember the obligations between families scattered across wide distances. Age matters, skill matters, reputation matters, kinship matters. But these forms of authority are often personal, shifting, and negotiated. A strong hunter may be respected in one season and ignored in another. A gifted ritual specialist may hold influence during a burial or gathering, yet have little command over daily movement. A person may persuade, warn, shame, bless, or teach, but that is very different from ruling. The evidence remains incomplete because most of what holds such societies together leaves little trace in the ground. Words vanish. Gestures vanish. The tone of a warning, the authority of a grandmother, The memory of an old promise between families all disappear without becoming artifacts. What survives instead is stubborn and fragmentary. Stone tools remain where hands dropped them. Hearths leave dark stains in ancient soil. Bones carry cut marks from butchery or healing from old injuries. Shell beads survive in graves. Pigments cling to cave walls. Footprints harden in mud ash or mineral crust, preserving a passing moment with almost cruel tenderness. A child walks beside an adult. A group crosses a wet surface. Someone carries weight on one side of the body. Such traces do not give the names of leaders or the borders of territories, but they reveal motion, care, habit, and presence. They remind us that the age before kingdoms is not an age before society. It is an age before certain kinds of society become dominant enough to rewrite the meaning of all the rest. For most of the human story, people live without states. That fact is easy to say and difficult to absorb. Kingdoms feel ancient because they stand near the beginning of written history, but written history begins very late. Homo sapiens has already existed for hundreds of thousands of years before the first cities form. For tens of millennia, humans survive ice ages, volcanic winters, shifting coastlines, vanished lakes, expanding deserts, and encounters with other human relatives, all without kings. They make tools of astonishing refinement. They travel across continents. They learn coastlines now drowned beneath the sea. They move through landscapes where mammoths, giant deer, woolly rhinoceroses, aurochs, cave lions, and other vanished animals still shape the rhythms of life. What survives in the record suggests that these people are not merely reacting to nature. They are interpreting it, remembering it, and in many places transforming it. Fire is one of the oldest signs of that transformation. A campfire is not a kingdom, but it is a center. Around it, food changes bodies. Warm predators keep their distance and night becomes less absolute. Firelight also gathers people into circles, and circles create memory. The same may be said of repeated campsites, hunting stations, quarry places, burial grounds, and painted caves. A place visited once is only a place. A place returned to again and again becomes part of a social world. It begins to hold stories. It may become dangerous, sacred, useful, forbidden, or beloved. Long before any ruler claims land as a possession, communities already know landscapes through memory and movement. Their territories are not always bordered in the later sense, but they are not random. They are webs of access, permission, familiarity, and risk. This is one of the strange difficulties of studying the world before kingdoms. Later states leave behind monuments built to announce themselves. Palaces' walls, roads, tombs, inscriptions, seals, and official storage rooms all speak the language of centralized power. Earlier societies often leave subtler traces, and because those traces are quieter, later observers once mistook them for simplicity. For a long time, the path of history was imagined as a ladder with mobile foragers near the bottom and kingdoms near the top. That old picture is now too crude. Scholars still debate the details, but there is broad agreement that human societies before states were varied, adaptive, and often far more sophisticated than older models allowed. Some remained highly mobile. Others settled for part of the year. Some built large ritual sites before farming became the foundation of life. Some managed plants without becoming full farmers. Some created wide exchange networks without markets or money. Some maintained relative equality. Others developed prestige competition and inherited difference long before the first crowned rulers. The world before kingdoms is therefore not a blank stage. It is more like a vast field of experiments. Human groups try different ways of living with land and each other. Some experiments last for thousands of years. Some collapse quietly. Some leave almost nothing. Others leave behind arrangements that later kingdoms will inherit and reshape: storage, ritual authority, ancestral places, seasonal gatherings, long-distance exchange, specialized craft, and the idea that certain locations matter more than others. No single explanation fully accounts for how these experiments eventually lead to states. Farming alone does not automatically create kings. Population growth alone does not guarantee hierarchy. Religion alone does not build a palace. Climate pressure alone does not forge a throne. The road toward kingdoms is uneven, local, and full of reversals. Yet even before that road becomes visible, there is already a deep pattern. Humans are creatures of cooperation under pressure. They share food, but not always equally. They care for the injured, but also compete for status. They make tools together, but guard certain knowledge. They move freely, but remember who belongs where. They bury the dead, but sometimes treat certain dead differently. They gather for reasons that are practical, emotional, and perhaps sacred all at once. The seeds of later civilization are not planted in one moment. They are scattered across countless ordinary acts: a family returning to the same valley, a group storing food for lean months, a child learning the path to water, a community burying ancestors near a dwelling, a band exchanging rare stone with people from far away, a feast large enough to bind strangers into obligation. If a person could stand in that world not as a conqueror or archaeologist, but simply as a witness, the first impression might be the silence of things not yet invented. No wheels grind on roads, no bronze weapons flash in royal armies, no tax collectors count harvests, no written orders travel between provinces. But the second impression would be the noise of life, already fully human hide, scraping over stone, children moving near camp edges, dogs perhaps watching from the firelight in later periods, flint striking bone reeds, rustling by rivers, voices carrying over water, footsteps returning to places the dead once knew. The absence of kingdoms is not the absence of history. It is history in another form, one that moves through bodies, memory, and landscape rather than through official records. This older world does not end all at once. It does not fall in a single collapse or transform in a single brilliant dawn. It changes gradually, unevenly, and sometimes reluctantly. The first settled places will not immediately erase the old wandering paths. The first fields will not instantly replace wild foods. The first leaders will not yet be kings. For a long time, human life exists between possibilities. Movement and settlement overlap. Foraging and cultivation mix. Ritual and survival blur. Equality and ambition pull against each other. Somewhere in that long tension beneath the ordinary needs of food, shelter, memory, and belonging, the foundations of the first kingdoms begin to form. But before those foundations can rise, the world must pass through the long age of wanderers, when human beings learn the earth by walking it, and the map of civilization exists only in memory, firelight, and the returning seasons. For countless generations, the human world is measured not by walls, but by distances remembered in the body. A ridge is known by the way the wind changes near its crest. A valley is known by the month when berries darken among thorny branches. A river bend is known by the fish that gather there when the water lowers and warms. A patch of exposed stone is known because it breaks cleanly into blades, and because someone's mother and her mother before her once carried pieces of it away in a hide bag. The long age of wanderers is not wandering in the careless sense. It is movement guided by knowledge so precise that later maps seem almost crude beside it. People move because animals move, because plants ripen in sequence, because water appears and vanishes, because snow blocks one route while opening another, because marriage ties ritual obligations, trade friendships and old stories pull families across a landscape that is never truly empty. The word hunter-gatherer can make this way of life sound thin, as if it is only a method of getting food. In reality, it describes entire worlds of skill timing, memory and restraint. A hunter must know not only how to bring down an animal, but when not to chase it, when a herd is too lean, when a wounded animal may lead into danger, when a track is fresh, and when a silence in the grass means another predator is near. A gatherer must know which plants are edible, which are poisonous, which require soaking, pounding, leaching, roasting, or peeling, and which appear only briefly after rain. Children grow into this knowledge slowly. They learn by watching hands, by carrying small things, by being corrected before mistakes become fatal. No written calendar tells them when to move, but the world itself is a calendar written in flowering plants, insect noise, animal fat, snowmelt shellfish beds, and the arrival of birds. This mobility creates a form of society very different from the later village, yet not less organized. Groups are often small for part of the year, then larger during seasons of abundance. Families split apart and come together not because social bonds are weak, but because flexibility is a survival tool. When food is scattered, a large group is dangerous. It exhausts the land too quickly. When salmon-run herds gather nuts ripen, or migrating animals pass through a narrow corridor, people can assemble in greater numbers. These gatherings are practical, but they're also social events of immense importance. News travels, partnerships form, marriages are arranged, disputes are settled or renewed, rare objects change hands. Songs, techniques, warnings, and stories move from one group to another. In such moments, the wider human world becomes visible not as a kingdom, but as a network. The evidence remains incomplete, yet archaeology reveals glimpses of this complexity in unexpected ways. Stone tools made from distant materials appear far from their original sources, showing that either people travelled great distances, or goods passed through many hands. Shell beads turn up inland. Pigments are carried to places where they do not naturally occur. Carefully shaped points, blades, scrapers, awls, needles, and ornaments show not only usefulness, but tradition. A tool is never just a tool. Its shape may reveal where its maker learned what group they belonged to, what animals they hunted, or how they expected the object to be repaired and reused. Across Ice Age, Europe, Africa, Asia, Australia, and the Americas, the surviving record suggests that mobile peoples develop regional styles, symbolic habits, and long chains of connection long before anyone writes down a law or stamps a seal into clay. Some of the most haunting traces come from places where people seem to have gathered for reasons beyond immediate survival. Deep caves painted with animals, signs, handprints, and abstract marks are not ordinary camps. Many are difficult to enter, cold, dark, and far from daylight. The people who go there carry light into darkness and leave images where daily life does not usually happen. Scholars still debate exactly what such places mean. Hunting, magic, initiation, memory, cosmology, teaching, trance, territorial marking, and storytelling have all been proposed, and no single explanation fully accounts for the variety of evidence. What is clear is that the people before kingdoms are not living in a purely practical world. They inhabit a world charged with meaning. Animals are food, danger-kin-like presences, seasonal signs, and perhaps beings with powers that later language cannot fully recover. A painted bison or horse is not a royal emblem, but it still gathers attention around shared belief. Burial offers another window into this older form of society. Some of the dead are left in ways that leave little trace. Others are placed carefully, sometimes with ornaments, tools, ochre flowers, animal parts, or personal objects. The meaning of these burials is debated, but care is visible. Bodies are arranged, graves are remembered. In some cases, people with severe injuries or disabilities survive for years, suggesting that others helped feed, protect, and include them. Such evidence resists the old idea that prehistoric life is only a brutal contest for survival. It is often dangerous, certainly. Hunger, infection, cold, childbirth, injury, and violence are real. But so are tenderness, cooperation, and social obligation. A person unable to hunt may still know stories, make tools, care for children, process hides, remember roots, or hold ritual knowledge. Human value is not easily reduced to strength. Life in the long age of wanderers also requires constant negotiation with risk. Mobile societies can avoid some dangers that later settled communities will struggle with. They can move away from exhausted resources. They are less likely to live permanently amid accumulated waste. Their diets may be diverse, changing with season and region. But mobility brings its own vulnerabilities. A broken leg during a journey can threaten more than one life. A failed migration of animals can empty a season. A sudden cold spell can turn a familiar route lethal. A neighbouring group may deny access to water or hunting grounds. A storm can erase tracks, soak fuel, and scatter people in open country. The freedom of movement is real, but it is never freedom from dependence. The land gives, but it does not guarantee. What makes these societies remarkable is the way they transform uncertainty into culture. They carry not only tools, but strategies. Some knowledge is stored in objects, a composite weapon, a woven container, a fitted skin garment, a carved point that can be replaced when broken. Some is stored in bodies, how to walk long distances without wasting strength, how to listen for animals under wind, how to find direction when landmarks vanish. Some is stored in stories. A story may explain where a dangerous crossing lies, why a certain waterhole must not be fouled, when a plant becomes safe to eat, or which strangers can be trusted because their ancestors once exchanged gifts with one's own. To later eyes, myth and practical knowledge can seem separate. In the world before kingdoms, they may belong to the same fabric. A tale about a spirit near a cliff may also keep children away from falling stone. There is a lesser-known kind of sophistication in the restraint many mobile peoples must practice. Agriculture will later encourage storage expansion and the defense of fixed fields. But foragers often survive by not taking everything. They may leave part of a plant stand untouched, avoid hunting at certain times, move before an area is stripped bare, or follow social rules that prevent one family from monopolizing a resource. This does not mean all such societies are peaceful or ecologically perfect. That would be another myth. People before kingdoms can overhunt, fight burn landscapes, compete, and make mistakes. Yet many long-lasting mobile systems depend on a deep understanding that survival requires tomorrow's landscape to remain alive. The future is not written in tax records or royal granaries, it is held in seasonal return. Across tens of thousands of years, this way of life spreads humans into nearly every kind of environment. People adapt to tropical forests, savannas, steppes, coasts, deserts, mountains, tundra, and islands. They cross water where later observers once assumed no ancient people could have crossed. They enter Australia at a time when sea levels and coastlines differ from those of today, requiring planning and movement through unfamiliar ecological worlds. They reach the Americas by routes scholars still examine and debate, with coastal and inland possibilities both part of the discussion. They survive in Ice Age Eurasia alongside Neanderthals and Denisovans, exchanging genes in ways only modern science has begun to reveal. Long before kingdoms divide people into subjects and foreigners, humanity is already a species of travellers, adapters and boundary crossers, and yet the long age of wanderers is not merely a prelude to settlement. It is the foundation beneath everything that follows. Later villages inherit the tool-making plant knowledge, animal tracking, symbolic life exchange ties, and social memory of mobile ancestors. Even when people begin to stay in one place for longer stretches, they do not instantly stop thinking like people of the route. Paths remain important. Seasonal gatherings continue. Wild foods remain essential. The dead are remembered in landscapes before they are remembered under house floors. The first settled communities will emerge not from ignorance, but from accumulated knowledge. They will rise from people who already understand land intimately, who already know how abundance can appear briefly and vanish, who already gather in groups larger than daily life requires, and who already attach meaning to special places. When the ice begins to withdraw, and the climate shifts toward a warmer world, those old habits do not disappear. They meet new possibilities, and the human map begins slowly and unevenly to change shape. The ice does not vanish like a curtain pulled away from the world. It retreats in pulses, hesitations, returns, and sudden failures, leaving behind a planet that is still half haunted by cold. For generations, people live at the edge of immense changes without knowing the full shape of them. A valley that once held a wall of ice begins to release meltwater. A plain that once stretched dry and open becomes marsh. Forests climb into land that had been tundra. Herds that once moved in familiar patterns shift, scatter, or disappear. Rivers swell with seasonal violence. Lakes form behind natural dams and sometimes burst through them. The old world of the late Ice Age, with its open grasslands and giant animals, does not simply end in one year or one disaster. It unravels across centuries, and the people living through it must read the changes as they come, one altered migration, one flooded camp, one unfamiliar tree line at a time. This warming world creates both loss and opportunity. In many regions, the great cold-adapted animals become rarer. Mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, giant deer, and other large creatures decline under pressures that scholars still debate, including climate change, habitat transformation, human hunting, and the complex interaction of all three. No single explanation fully accounts for every extinction in every place. Some animals vanish quickly in certain regions and linger in others. Some survive on isolated islands long after their mainland relatives disappear. For human groups who have followed large herds for generations, such changes are not abstract environmental facts. They alter diet, movement, clothing tool, traditions, and perhaps identity itself. A people whose stories, skills, and seasonal gatherings revolve around reindeer, gazelle, bison, wild cattle, or other animals must adapt when those patterns no longer hold steady. As the climate warms, forests spread across parts of Europe and Asia, changing the nature of hunting. Open landscapes favor long sight lines, herd tracking, and weapons suited to animals visible across distance. Forests create a different world, enclosed, shadowed, rich in plants and smaller game, but harder to read from afar. Deer-boar birds, fish, nuts, berries, roots, and freshwater resources become increasingly important in many places. Along coasts, estuaries, rivers, and lakes, people exploit fish, shellfish, waterfowl reeds, and seasonal plant foods with growing intensity. In some regions, the archaeological record shows more grinding stones, fishing equipment, microliths, and other tools suited to broad-spectrum subsistence. This does not mean humans suddenly discover variety. They have always known many foods. But the balance changes. The world after the ice rewards flexibility in new ways. The most dramatic transformation is also the most difficult to imagine, because so much of its evidence now lies underwater. As ice sheets melt, sea levels rise, swallowing coastal plains, river valleys, hunting grounds, burial places, and seasonal camps. The shorelines familiar to late Ice Age peoples are not the shorelines seen on modern maps. Wide lands once connect places now divided by sea. In the region later called Doggerland, for example, dry ground once stretches between Britain and continental Europe, supporting animals, wetlands, rivers, and human movement before rising waters gradually drown it. Similar lost landscapes exist in many parts of the world. Continental shelves that were once habitable, estuaries now submerged routes now hidden beneath waves. What survives in the record is only the upper edge of a vanished world. Much of the story of the first coastal communities after the Ice Age has been erased or buried under the sea. This drowning of old land is not always sudden, but gradual change can still be devastating. A campsite near a river mouth may become too wet to use. A route across low ground may turn to marsh, then channel, then open water. Freshwater sources may become brackish. Shellfish beds may move. Old graves may be lost to tides. Places where ancestors returned for generations may disappear without leaving anything visible. Human memory can preserve the knowledge of a lost land for a time, perhaps in stories of floods, shorelines, or places beneath water, though connecting later traditions to specific ancient events is always uncertain and must be handled carefully. The evidence remains incomplete. Still, the physical fact is undeniable. People after the ice lived through one of the greatest remappings of human space in deep history. Inland, the changes are just as profound. Melting ice releases enormous volumes of water. Rivers carve new courses. Glacial lakes appear, expand, drain, and vanish. In some regions, land slowly rises after the weight of ice is lifted, while elsewhere, seas push inward. The ground itself seems unstable on the scale of generations. A grandparent may remember a different coastline. A child may grow up beside a marsh, where older stories speak of dry meadow. Groups that once moved across broad open plains find themselves navigating forests, wetlands, and broken water systems. Others discover new abundance in exactly those changed environments. Wetlands are not wastelands to people who know how to live with them. They can offer fish, birds, reeds, roots, shellfish, mammals, and transport routes by canoe or raft. The world becomes more intricate and human strategies become intricate with it. This is where the path towards settlement begins to become more visible, though it is still not a straight path. When resources are widely scattered and seasonal mobility remains essential. But where certain places offer repeated abundance, people can return, more often stay longer and invest more effort in structures, storage and ritual. A river rich in fish, a marsh full of birds and edible plants, a stand of nut trees, a reliable spring or a valley where wild grains grow densely may anchor life in ways that open steppe could not. People do not need farming to begin forming strong attachments to place. They need reliability, memory, and reasons to gather. The warming world creates more of these places in some regions even as it destroys others. In the Eastern Mediterranean and Southwest Asia, the transition is especially important. Communities begin exploiting wild cereals and other resources in ways that foreshadow later agriculture. Grinding stones become more common. Settlements may be used repeatedly or occupied for longer periods. Houses, storage pits, and communal spaces begin to appear in some areas before full domesticated farming is established. The Natufian culture of the Levant is often discussed in this context, not because it is the only experiment of its kind, but because it shows how complex semi-sedentary life can develop before the classic farming village. People gather wild grains, hunt gazelle, and other animals use stone sickle blades, create distinctive ornaments, bury their dead, and sometimes live in more substantial structures than highly mobile groups would usually build. Scholars still debate how climate shifts, Resource abundance, population pressure, and social factors interact in this process. But the pattern is clear enough to be striking. Staying longer begins before agriculture fully arrives. The Younger Dryas, a sudden return to colder and drier conditions in many regions after a warming trend, adds another twist to this story. It does not affect every place in the same way, and its social consequences remain debated. Yet in parts of Southwest Asia, changing climate may have placed pressure on communities that had begun relying more heavily on local resources. Wild cereals may have become less predictable in some areas. Animal movements may have shifted. People already accustomed to returning to favoured places may have faced a difficult choice move as before. Intensify gathering, manage plants more deliberately, or experiment with cultivation. It would be too simple to say that climate change invented farming. Human decisions, knowledge, tradition, and social life matter just as much. But environmental stress can make old habits less secure and new habits more attractive. The world after the ice therefore stands between two great human possibilities. One is the old brilliance of movement refined over tens of thousands of years. The other is the growing power of place. Neither fully replaces the other. For a long time they overlap. People settle, seasonally move when necessary, store some foods, gather others, fresh hunt wild animals, manage plants without yet domesticating them, and return to special sites where the dead, the living and the landscape become tied together. The foundations of later villages are being laid, but not with royal commands or grand plans. They are laid by repeated return, by the convenience of stored food, by the memory of buried kin, by the discovery that some landscapes can hold people longer than before. It is tempting to imagine this as progress, but for the people living it, the experience may feel more ambiguous. A settled place offers safety, abundance, and belonging, but also dependence. A stored harvest can feed a community through hunger, but it can also fail. A rich fishing ground can support many people, but it can attract rivals. A burial ground can root identity, but it can also make departure painful. After the ice withdraws, humanity does not simply step forward into civilization. It enters a more complicated relationship with the earth. The old paths remain behind them, still powerful, still remembered. Ahead lie the first settled places where the habit of returning becomes the habit of staying, and where the world before kingdoms begins to grow, walls, floors, hearths, and memories fixed into the ground. The first settled places do not announce themselves with grandeur. They begin as shallow hollows in the earth, circles of stone, packed floors, post holes, hearths darkened by repeated fires, pits dug for storage, and refuse scattered in patterns that only much later become evidence. To the people who live there, these places may not seem revolutionary. They are simply useful, familiar, well-positioned near water plants, animals, and paths of movement. Yet something profound is changing. A camp used briefly leaves one kind of trace. A place returned to season after season leaves another. A place occupied long enough for repairs, rebuilding, burial, storage, and shared memory leaves something different again. The ground begins to gather human intention. A settlement is not only where people stay, it is where people begin to imagine that a particular piece of earth belongs to the rhythm of their lives. In this period, there is no clear line between mobile life and settled life. Many communities still move, but they move differently. They may spend part of the year in one place and part elsewhere. They may maintain seasonal camps near hunting grounds while returning to a more substantial base when food is abundant. They may build structures that are not permanent in the later village sense, but are too deliberate to be called temporary shelters. Archaeologists often use careful terms such as semi-sedentary or sedentary to describe these patterns, but the lived reality is more fluid than the categories suggest. A family may know several homes, each tied to a season. A group may store food in one valley, bury kin in another, and gather with allied families at a third. The old geography of movement remains, but certain places begin to pull harder. What makes a place worth staying near is rarely one thing. Water matters, but water alone is not enough. A river bend may offer fish reeds, birds, and transport. A hillside may provide wild cereals, nuts, tubers, grazing animals, and stone for tools. A marsh may look difficult to later farmers, but rich to people skilled in its cycles. A coastal inlet may provide shellfish fish traps, seabirds driftwood, and access to inland routes. The most desirable places are often ecological crossroads where different kinds of food become available at different times of year. Such abundance allows longer stays, and longer stays allow heavier tools, stronger buildings, deeper storage, and more elaborate social gatherings. Mobility favours what can be carried. Settlement allows what can be left behind. This simple fact changes material life. Grinding stones, mortars, storage vessels, large hearths, house floors, and built features become more practical when people expect to return or remain. A heavy grinding slab is not carried casually across long distances, it belongs to a place. Storage pits also require confidence that food can be gathered in surplus, confidence that the pit will not be robbed, flooded, spoiled, or forgotten, and confidence that the people who bury food will have the right to come back and use it. Storage is one of the quiet revolutions before kingdoms. It stretches the present into the future. It allows a community to survive lean months, but it also creates new questions. Who gathered the food? Who guards it? Who decides when it is opened? Who receives more when supplies are low? Long before taxes or royal granaries, stored food begins to make social life more complicated. Architecture deepens that complication. A shelter can be abandoned with little grief. A house repaired many times becomes part of identity. Its posts, floor, hearth, and doorway organize daily movement. Children learn the shape of space before they understand social rules. The place where food is prepared, where tools are made, where sleeping bodies lie, where visitors enter, where elders sit, where refuse is thrown, all become part of a repeated pattern. The house makes social life visible. It separates inside from outside, household from neighbouring household, familiar from stranger. It also creates memory in wood, mud, stone, reed, and packed earth. When a house burns, collapses, or is deliberately filled in something more than a structure ends, a small social world has changed form. Some early settlements are modest, but others become surprisingly substantial. In the Levant, in Anatolia, in parts of the Fertile Crescent, and eventually in many other regions, archaeologists find traces of communities that are neither wandering bands nor kingdoms. They are something in between, though that phrase can be misleading, as if they are unfinished versions of later states. They are better understood as experiments in living together at new scales. Some have round or oval structures. Others later develop rectangular houses. Some show communal buildings or spaces larger than ordinary dwellings. Some are occupied repeatedly over long periods, creating mounds of accumulated debris and rebuilding known as tells. A tell is a kind of slow monument not built by royal order, but by generations living on top of the remains of those before them. The settlement rises because people do not leave completely. Their own past becomes the foundation under their feet. The dead also help fasten people to place. In many early settled or semi-settled communities, burials occur near dwellings, beneath floors, around settlement edges, or in special areas. What these practices mean varies, and scholars still debate the details, but the effect is powerful. A place where ancestors lie is not easily abandoned. The dead turn land into memory. They may legitimize claims, bind households, or create a sense that the living are part of a longer chain. Even when the evidence remains incomplete, it is clear that burial and settlement often reinforce one another. People return to where the dead are placed, and returning makes the place more important. Over time, the ground becomes layered not only with ash and stone, but with belonging. Yet these first settled places are not peaceful villages from a simple golden age. They are practical responses to opportunity, and opportunity attracts tension. More people in one place means more waste, more disease, risk, more conflict, and more need for coordination. Stored food can be shared, but it can also be stolen. Houses can shelter families, but they can also mark difference. A community that stays near a rich resource must decide how outsiders are treated. Are visiting kin welcome? Are strangers dangerous? Does abundance create generosity, competition, or both? No single explanation fully accounts for how early settlements manage these pressures, because the rules themselves rarely survive. What survives are patterns, walls, repaired, houses, rebuilt bodies, buried tools, concentrated food, remains discarded occasional signs of violence, and long rhythms of occupation, followed sometimes by abandonment. One surprising detail is that settlement does not always wait for domesticated crops and animals. In several regions, people create substantial communities while still relying heavily on wild resources. This matters because it reverses a once common assumption. Farming is not simply invented first, with villages following automatically behind. In some places, the desire or advantage of staying together may come before full agriculture. Wild grains can be harvested intensively. Fish can be dried. Nuts can be stored. Gazelle deer, wild cattle, boar, and birds can support communities when combined with plant foods and seasonal movement. The first settled places therefore emerge from a mosaic of strategies, not from a single discovery. They are built by people who still know the old ways of mobility, but who now find that certain landscapes reward return so strongly that leaving becomes less necessary or more difficult. Communal labour is another quiet sign of change. A small mobile group can make decisions through close kinship and direct conversation. A larger settlement requires more coordination. Building a shared structure, maintaining storage areas, organising large hunts, preparing feasts, repairing paths, managing water or arranging burial practices all require people to act together beyond the household. This does not mean rulers exist. Many communities can organise collective work through custom-age kin networks, ritual obligation, or temporary leadership. But the experience of coordinated labour matters. It teaches people that a group larger than one family can reshape the world. A wall, a communal building, a cleared area, a storage system, or a ritual gathering place becomes evidence that human cooperation can be fixed into the landscape. Still, the first settled places remain vulnerable. Their success depends on balance. Too little food and the settlement cannot hold its people. Too many people and the surrounding resources may be strained. Too much attachment and movement becomes harder when conditions worsen. Too much storage and inequality may begin to grow around control. The promise of settlement carries its own shadow. Every hearth that burns in the same place year after year creates warmth, continuity, and memory, but it also creates dependence on that place continuing to provide. The old wanderers could spread risk across a wide landscape. The early settled community begins to concentrate risk beneath one roof, around one spring, beside one stand of grain, within one ring of remembered paths. This is why the first settled places feel so important in the long story before kingdoms. They are not yet cities, not yet states, not yet civilizations in the later monumental sense. But they change the human relationship with time. A mobile camp looks toward the next movement. A settled place looks toward return, repair, storage, inheritance, and memory. People begin to build as if their future selves, their children, or their dead will still matter in the same location. From that shift, countless later developments become possible. Heavier tools, larger gatherings, stronger ancestor traditions, defended resources, shared ritual spaces, and eventually fields. The world before kingdoms is beginning to thicken. The landscape is no longer only travelled through. It is being occupied, remembered, modified, and claimed in ways that do not yet require a king, but will one day make kings imaginable. Before fields become permanent and before barns fill with domesticated grain, people are already gathering in ways that exceed the demands of ordinary survival. They come together where the land seems to hold more than food, on ridges that command wide views beside springs that do not fail near stone outcrops, in caves at river crossings, along migration corridors, or at places where the dead have been remembered long enough for memory itself to become a reason for return. These gatherings may include hunting exchange, marriage, toolmaking, and the sharing of news, but something else is often present, something harder to name from broken stone and buried bone. People bring food not only to eat but to give. They prepare more than a household needs. They consume in groups larger than daily life requires. They create moments of abundance so visible that they become events. In a world before kingdoms, feasting is one of the first ways a crowd can become a community. A feast is not just a large meal. It is a social instrument. It can soften tensions, display generosity, create debt, mark a death, celebrate a seasonal return, seal an alliance, honor a place, or turn strangers into temporary kin. It can also create competition. The person or group able to provide more meat, more grain, more drink, more ornaments, or more labor gains prestige, even if that prestige does not yet become formal rule. This is why feasting matters so deeply in the world before kingdoms. It allows influence to grow without a throne. It permits ambition to appear in the language of generosity. A successful host does not command like a king, but people remember who fed them. They remember who had access to the best hunting grounds, who organized the labor, who called the gathering, who knew the correct ritual order, and who could transform stored food or hunted animals into public obligation. The evidence for such practices is difficult to interpret, and scholars still debate many details. Archaeologists may find unusually large quantities of animal bones, special deposits, oversized vessels, communal structures, repeated burning, grinding stones, or concentrations of food remains that suggest events larger than daily consumption. But the meaning of any one deposit is rarely certain. A pile of bones can mark a feast, a refuse dump, a ritual offering a seasonal kill, or several of these at once. The ancient world does not always separate practical and sacred acts in the way modern categories prefer. An animal killed for food may also be part of ceremony. A meal shared after a burial may be both nourishment and memory. A gathering for hunting may also be a gathering for marriage, storytelling, exchange, and obligation. No single explanation fully accounts for the layered character of these places. In Southwest Asia, where some of the most important early experiments in settlement and cultivation take place, the role of ritual gathering before full farming has become one of the most fascinating problems in archaeology. Sites with monumental or communal features suggest that people could coordinate impressive labor before the rise of king cities or even fully agricultural economies. The most famous example is Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Anatolia, where massive stone pillars, circular enclosures, carved animals, and evidence of repeated activity have forced scholars to rethink older assumptions. The site does not prove that religion simply came before farming in a simple cause and effect chain, and popular claims often push the evidence too far. Yet it does show that hunter-gatherer or transitional communities were capable of organizing labor symbolism and gatherings at a scale once thought to belong only to settled farming societies. The evidence remains incomplete, but the implication is powerful. People may have come together around meaning before they came together around fields. Such places are not kingdoms in embryo, but they reveal a form of collective life that can prepare the ground for later hierarchy. To raise large stones, shape spaces, carve images, prepare food and bring people together across a landscape requires coordination. Someone must know when the gathering occurs. Someone must remember the practices associated with the place. Someone must teach the young what the carved animals mean, or at least how to behave near them. Authority in this setting may belong to ritual specialists, elders, skilled organizers, or lineages with recognized ties to the site. It may be temporary and situational rather than permanent. Still, once a place becomes central to gatherings, it can accumulate power. People travel toward it. Food flows into it. Labor is spent on it. Stories attached to it. The site begins to stand above ordinary places not because a ruler declares it so, but because repeated human attention makes it different. Feasting also helps explain why people might intensify food production before they are forced to by hunger. Older theories often imagined agriculture as a desperate response to scarcity. Scarcity may sometimes matter, especially during climatic instability, but it is not the whole story. People may also want surplus for social reasons. More grain means more bread, more porridge, perhaps eventually more fermented drink. More managed animals mean more meat for events that display generosity or prestige. More stored food means the ability to gather people at the right time and feed them long enough to build morn merry trade or worship. In this view, abundance is not only a safety net, it is a social material. It can be turned into reputation. The first steps toward cultivation may therefore be tied as much to celebration, obligation, and rivalry as to simple survival. The surprising detail is that feasts may create inequality even when they look like sharing. A meal offered freely can carry a hidden weight. Those who receive may feel gratitude, loyalty, or debt. Those who provide may gain influence without openly claiming superiority. If one household lineage or ritual group repeatedly organizes major gatherings, their status can become more durable. They may control access to a sacred place, a productive grove, a hunting drive, a storage area, or specialized knowledge. This does not mean early feasting automatically produces chiefs or kings. Many societies use feasts to redistribute resources and maintain balance rather than hierarchy. But the same act can work in different directions. Sharing can bind a group together, and it can also reveal who has more to share. Ancestor memory deepens the force of these gatherings. A feast held near graves beneath painted walls beside carved stones, or in a settlement where the dead lie under floors, links the living to those who came before. The dead do not speak, but they can authorize. They can make a claim seem older than any living person. They can turn a place into inheritance. When people gather to eat near ancestral remains, or in spaces associated with remembered generations, they are not simply consuming food. They are placing themselves inside a chain of belonging. What survives in the record suggests that early communities often use the dead to think about the living who belongs, who descends from whom, who has the right to stay, who may return, and who must be remembered. Long before royal genealogies stretch backward into myth, ordinary communities are already using ancestry to shape social space. There is also an emotional dimension that stone and bone can only hint at. Seasonal gatherings may be among the rare times when widely scattered people see distant kin. Children meet relatives whose names they have heard in stories. Young adults encounter possible partners. Old disputes are reopened or settled. News arrives from beyond the familiar valley. People compare tools, ornaments, songs, scars, and tales of animals seen elsewhere. A feast in such a context is both practical and deeply human. It is a way of making the wider world feel less dangerous. It transforms strangers into guests, guests into allies, and allies into people who may later share food information or shelter in hard times. Before kingdoms create official roads and diplomatic marriages, feasting creates networks through appetite, memory, and obligation. Yet gatherings can also be volatile. A crowd brings opportunity but also rivalry. More people mean more chances for insult, jealousy, theft, courtship, conflict, or competition over prestige. Ritual rules may help control this danger. Ceremonial order, gift exchange, shared labour, and the authority of elders may keep tensions from breaking into violence. But the need for such rules itself tells a larger story. Human groups are becoming capable of assembling at scales that require more than ordinary kinship. The skills learned in these gatherings, organising labour, managing food, marking status, settling disputes, creating shared symbols, and focusing attention on special places, will later become essential to villages, temples, and states. The feast is not a kingdom, but it teaches people how large groups can be drawn together and held if only for a season. The world before kingdoms is therefore not moving directly from hunger to farming, or from farming to kings. It is passing through a more subtle transformation. People are learning that food can do more than sustain the body. It can create memory. It can build loyalty. It can display power without naming it. It can turn a landscape into a destination and a gathering into a tradition. Around shared meals, beside sacred stones near the bones of ancestors, and under skies watched by people who still know the old roots, society begins to thicken again. The grain that will change everything is not yet fully domesticated in every place, but the desire to gather store, give, remember, and return is already there. When wild grasses begin to draw more attention, they enter a human world already prepared to turn food into something far larger than survival. The first grain does not look like destiny. It grows in patches across hillsides, open woodland steppe margins and valley floors, bending in the wind with no awareness that human beings will one day build cities, temples, armies and tax systems around its descendants. Wild wheat, barley, rye, millet, rice and other grasses are not yet crops in the full domestic sense. They are part of a wider living landscape, competing with other plants, feeding birds and rodents, ripening when weather allows, scattering their seeds when touched by wind, hooves or hands. To a passing animal they are forage. To a skilled forager they are a seasonal opportunity. To a community beginning to stay longer in one place, they become something more dangerous and more powerful, food that can be gathered in quantity, dried, stored, ground, shared, guarded and planted again. At first the change is subtle. People who know plants intimately do not suddenly discover that grasses are edible. They have known this for a very long time. The shift lies in attention, repetition and intensity. A patch of wild grain near a favoured settlement is visited at the right moment year after year. Stalks are cut with stone sickles whose edges develop a distinctive polish from contact with silica-rich stems. Seeds are carried back in baskets or skins. Husks are removed through pounding, grinding, winnowing, roasting, or other techniques that require labour and patience. The work is not glamorous. It bends backs, roughens hands, fills lungs with dust and demands careful timing. But it produces something extraordinary, a concentrated food that can outlast the day of its gathering. Meat rots unless dried or smoked. Fruit spoils, leaves wilt, grain waits. Storage turns grass into power. A basket of grain is not simply food, it is future time held in edible form. It can feed children after the season of abundance has passed. It can support people during a failed hunt. It can be brought to a feast offered in exchange hidden from rivals, or counted by those who claim responsibility for its protection. Here the world before kingdoms begins to acquire one of its most consequential habits, the habit of surplus. Surplus is often described as the foundation of civilization, but that phrase can make it sound neutral. Surplus is never only extra. It raises questions that mobile life can sometimes avoid. Who has the right to the stored grain? Is it the family that harvested it, the whole community, the ritual group that blessed the gathering, the elders who decide distribution, or the people strong enough to defend it? The evidence remains incomplete, but the social implications are hard to miss. Food that stays in one place encourages people to stay near it, and people who stay near stored food must create rules around it. The plants themselves also begin to change, though not because anyone understands genetics in the modern sense. When people harvest wild cereals, they may favour certain traits without intending to reshape the species. Wild grasses often scatter their seeds naturally when ripe, a useful feature for the plant but inconvenient for human harvesters. If people gather seeds from plants that hold on to their grains a little longer, and if some of those seeds are dropped near camps or deliberately sown over generations, the balance can shift. Larger seeds, tougher stalk attachments, more predictable ripening, and other traits become more common under human selection. Domestication is not a single invention. It is a long entanglement between human behavior and plant reproduction. Scholars still debate the pace and pathways in different regions because the evidence varies and early cultivation may leave faint traces, yet the broad pattern is clear. By repeatedly favoring certain plants, humans begin to create landscapes that favor humans in return. This process does not happen everywhere at once, and it does not involve the same plants everywhere. In Southwest Asia, wheat, barley, lentils, peas, chickpeas, and flax become part of early agricultural systems. In China, rice and millet follow different regional histories. In New Guinea, tubers and bananas are managed in ways that do not resemble cereal farming. In the Americas, maize, squash beans, potatoes, and other crops emerge through long local processes. In Africa, sorghum, pearl, millet, yams, and other plants have their own pathways into cultivation. The world before kingdoms is not one story unfolding from a single birthplace. It is a series of regional experiments, each shaped by climate, plant ecology, animal populations, human tradition, and social need. The famous Fertile Crescent is crucial, but it is not the whole human story. Still in the arc leading toward the earliest kingdoms, the cereal fields of Southwest Asia and nearby regions hold special importance because of what grain allows when combined with settlement. Grain can be stored in bulk. It can be measured, transported, and eventually taxed. It can feed specialists who do not gather all their own food. It can support larger populations in dense settlements. It can also fail catastrophically. This is the double edge of the grain revolution. Wild resources spread risk across many species and places. A grain-based system concentrates hope into fewer plants, fewer fields, and narrower seasons. When it works, it produces abundance beyond what small mobile groups can easily carry. When it fails, it can bring hunger to many people at once. For the first cultivators, the change may not feel like triumph. Early farming is often harder work than foraging in rich environments. It requires clearing, sowing, weeding, harvesting, processing, storing, protecting, and repeating. It may narrow diet. It can increase exposure to disease as people live closer together. It can tie communities to land even when the land becomes exhausted. Human bones from early farming populations in some regions show signs that the transition is not an immediate improvement in health. Stature, dental wear cavities, stress markers, and disease patterns can shift in troubling ways, though the evidence differs by place and period. What survives in the record suggests that agriculture is not simply adopted because it makes life easier. It spreads because it makes certain kinds of life possible, especially larger, more settled, more reproducible communities. There is a quiet trap here. Once a community depends heavily on cultivated grain, turning back becomes difficult. More food can support more children. More children require more food. More fields require more labour. More labour encourages larger households or stronger cooperation. A bad harvest can be endured if storage is sufficient, but storage demands planning and protection. Over generations, people may find that the old freedom to move has narrowed. The fields must be watched. The harvest must be timed. The stored grain must be defended. The ancestors are buried nearby. Houses have been rebuilt in the same place. Paths lead inward rather than outward. No king has ordered this transformation, yet the community is already bound by a web stronger than command. The tools of this new life are humble but revolutionary. Sickles, grinding stones, digging sticks, baskets, storage pits, clay-lined bins, and eventually pottery become part of the daily rhythm. These objects do not shine like gold, but they alter history more deeply than many treasures. A grinding stone may pass through hands for years, becoming worn smooth by labour repeated thousands of times. A storage pit may be opened during scarcity like a promise kept by the past. A sickle blade may cut not only stems but the line between occasional gathering and deliberate harvest. Such tools are often associated with domestic spaces, and much of the labour may fall to people whose names never enter history. Women, elders, children, and ordinary household members whose work makes settled life possible. Later kings will boast of conquest and divine favour. Beneath them, the real foundation is grain processed by tired hands. The relationship between cultivation and belief is also important. Plants that return from buried seed can easily become symbols of death, renewal, ancestry, and seasonal order. A field is a practical space, but it's also a place of waiting. Seeds vanish into soil and emerge later as life. Rain becomes blessing or disaster. Pests become enemies. Harvest becomes judgment. The community's survival depends on forces partly understood and partly beyond control. Ritual timing observation and memory gather around the agricultural year. The sky matters differently when planting depends on season. The earth matters differently when it holds the next harvest. The dead beneath or near the settlement may seem connected to fertility land and continuity. It would be too simple to claim that farming creates religion because symbolic life is far older. But farming gives older beliefs new anchors in soil, seed, and return. As grain becomes more central, the landscape itself changes. Wild stands are encouraged, cleared, protected, and eventually transformed into fields. Trees may be cut. Burning may open ground. Animals are drawn to stored food and crops, leading to new relationships with pests, dogs, cats in later farming contexts, and eventually managed herds. Paths form between houses, fields, water sources, and storage areas. The settlement no longer sits lightly upon the land, it presses into it. The land around it becomes a human-shaped zone, neither wild in the old sense nor fully controlled. This middle landscape is unstable, productive, and full of consequences. The grain that changed everything did so because it joined biology to memory. Each harvest carried the choices of earlier seasons. Each seed saved for planting represented trust in the future. Each storage pit tied a household to the ground. Each field made departure more costly. The world before kingdoms is still a world without royal palaces, but it is no longer a world without accumulation. Food accumulates, labor accumulates, claims accumulate. People begin to inherit not only stories and tools, but places improved by those before them. From this, villages can grow deeper roots, and in those villages still without kings, human beings will discover that staying together creates both extraordinary cooperation and new forms of tension, as if the first small fields have awakened a force no one fully knows how to control. The first villages without kings are among the most revealing places in the human past, because they show society becoming larger, denser, and more rooted without yet producing the familiar machinery of monarchy. There are no royal names carved above gateways, no palace courtyards where officials gather, no throne rooms, no army shown trampling enemies beneath divine symbols. Instead, there are houses, hearths, storage bins, courtyards, workshops, burials, ovens, pathways, shared walls, and daily routines repeated so often that they become a kind of architecture of ordinary life. These villages do not look empty of power, but power is difficult to isolate. It is spread through households, kin groups, elders, ritual practices, skilled craft memory, and the practical authority of those who know how to keep a community functioning. The absence of kings does not mean the absence of order. It means order is still being made from below, negotiated across doorways, workspaces, meals, marriages and obligations that rarely leave written traces. A village changes the scale of human attention. In a mobile band, many decisions concern movement, when to leave, where to camp, which route is safe, which resource is ready. In a settled village, movement remains important, but daily life begins to circle around repeated places. The same hearth is swept and rekindled. The same floor is repaired. The same roof is patched before rain. The same path to water is worn by bare feet, sandals, and carried vessels. Tools are no longer all designed to be portable. Heavy grinding stones stay where labor happens. Storage containers remain in houses or shared spaces. Refuse accumulates at settlement edges or in abandoned structures. Children grow up knowing not only the landscape beyond the village, but the social geography within it. Which house belongs to which family, which doorway is welcoming, which elder must be approached carefully, which corner holds dangerous tools, which space is used for gatherings, and which places carry the presence of the dead. One of the striking things about many early villages is how much they reveal about cooperation without clearly revealing rulers. At sites across the Neolithic world, people build houses with similar plans, share construction methods, use common technologies, and participate in overlapping symbolic practices. Such uniformity can suggest strong communal traditions rather than top-down command. A village may be held together by custom so deeply accepted that it does not require a king to enforce it. People build in a certain way because that is how houses are built. They bury the dead in certain places because that is how belonging is maintained. They share access to tools, oven storage spaces, or ritual knowledge because those practices are embedded in social life. Scholars still debate how leadership worked in such communities, but the evidence often points toward flexible and situational authority rather than permanent centralized rule. This does not make these places egalitarian utopias. Equality in the archaeological record is difficult to prove, and the evidence remains incomplete. Some households may have more labor, better access to fields, stronger kin ties, greater ritual prestige, or more stored food than others. Some individuals may be remembered differently in death. Certain crafts may be controlled by specialists. Certain families may have stronger claims to particular buildings or ancestors. But in many early villages, wealth differences are not yet displayed on the scale later seen in chiefdoms, city-states, or kingdoms. There are few signs of royal hoarding. No massive palaces dominate the settlement. No single burial clearly towers above all others in splendour. The social world may contain prestige and rivalry, yet it has not crystallized into the theatrical inequality of monarchy. Power is present but still relatively close to daily life. Çatalhöyük in central Anatolia often stands as one of the most fascinating examples of this world, though it must not be treated as a universal model. Occupied for many centuries, it forms a dense settlement of mud brick houses, packed closely together with roof access rather than streets in the familiar later sense. People move across rooftops, descend into rooms, cook, sleep, store, make tools, create wall paintings and installations, and bury some of their dead beneath house floors. There is no obvious palace. There is no clear temple standing apart from ordinary domestic life, though some houses contain richer symbolic features than others. This is what makes the place so compelling. It suggests a community in which ritual, household memory, and daily labour are deeply intertwined. The sacred is not necessarily separated into a grand public monument. It may live inside the house, beneath the floor, on the wall near the hearth. The details are both intimate and strange. Some rooms contain platforms used for sleeping, working, and burial. Some walls bear paintings or reliefs involving animals, geometric designs, and possibly scenes of human activity, though interpretation remains debated. Bullhorns and other installations appear in certain houses, giving some spaces a charged symbolic quality. People plaster and replaster walls, sometimes many times, creating layers of maintenance that speak to long occupation and careful attention. The village is not simply a cluster of shelters. It is a dense field of memory where houses have biographies and households may gain significance through continuity. What survives in the record suggests that certain buildings may become more important because they are rebuilt, remembered, and associated with ancestors or repeated practices. Authority here may not come from a throne but from the depth of a house's past. Other early settlements show different arrangements. Jericho, with its early stone tower and walls, has long drawn attention, though scholars debate whether its walls were built for defense, flood control, social display, or some combination of purposes. In the Levant Anatolia, the Zagros and beyond Neolithic communities experiment with circular houses, rectangular houses, communal buildings, storage systems, and new forms of village layout. In parts of Europe, early farming villages later spread along river valleys and lowest soils, bringing longhouses, fields, livestock, and pottery traditions. In each region, the village is not merely a physical place. It is a new social machine. It gathers labour, organises households, concentrates memory, and creates a scale of living that requires durable rules even when those rules are not written. The domestication of animals adds another layer to village life. Sheep, goats, cattle, pigs, and other animals enter human communities through long, uneven processes that vary by region. Herds provide meat milk in later developed systems, hides bone-horn traction in much later contexts, manure and social value. But animals also create problems. They compete for food and water. They damage crops. They carry disease. They require herding protection, breeding decisions, and seasonal planning. Keeping animals near people changes the ecology of the village. It brings smells, noise, parasites, and new forms of wealth. A herd can grow, be exchanged, stolen, sacrificed, inherited, or used in feasts. Unlike a wild animal taken in a hunt, a managed animal is a living store of value. Its presence makes social difference easier to accumulate. Craft also begins to matter in new ways. In mobile life, craft is already sophisticated, but settlement allows certain forms of production to deepen. Pottery appears in some regions, though not always at the beginning of farming, and it transforms storage, cooking, serving, and symbolic display. Woven textiles, baskets, mats, plaster beads, Polished stone axes, bone tools, and ground stone objects all reveal specialized knowledge. Some materials come from far away, indicating exchange networks that connect villages across landscapes. Obsidian from volcanic sources can travel impressive distances, prized for its sharpness and perhaps for its visual qualities. Shells move inland. Greenstone axes travel beyond their source areas. These exchanges do not require markets in the later sense. They may move through kinship, marriage ritual gatherings, gift obligations, or travelling specialists. Still, they show that villages are not isolated islands. They are nodes in a web. Within these villages, the household becomes one of the most important units in history. It is where food is processed, children are raised, tools are maintained, stories are repeated, bodies are cared for, and ancestry is remembered. But the household is not sealed off from the wider community. It depends on neighbours for labour marriage partners, defence ritual exchange, and help during crisis. The balance between household independence and communal obligation is delicate. Too much independence and the village fragments into competing families. Too much collective pressure and households may resist or leave. No single explanation fully accounts for how early villages maintained this balance, but their endurance suggests that many succeeded for long periods. They developed social habits strong enough to hold people together without kings. The village without kings is therefore one of the most important experiments humanity ever makes. It proves that people can live in large settled communities without immediately producing palaces or dynasties. It also reveals the tensions that will eventually make stronger forms of authority attractive or unavoidable in some places. As houses accumulate history as fields, require coordination, as storage grows, as herds become wealth, as ritual spaces gain prestige, and as exchange networks widen, the village becomes richer in possibility and heavier with conflict. The old freedom of the wanderer has not vanished, but it has been transformed. People can still leave, yet leaving now means abandoning walls, floors, ancestors' fields, stored food, and social claims built over generations. The world before kingdoms has become more rooted, more crowded, more productive, and more fragile. Beneath its calm roofs, the trouble with staying put is already beginning to stir. The trouble with staying put begins quietly. It begins in the places where daily life seems most secure beside the hearth, near the storage pit around the animal pen, along the path to the fields, inside houses whose walls have been repaired so many times that they appear almost permanent. A settled village offers warmth, memory, and continuity, but it also gathers risks that mobile life once spread across the landscape. When people live close together, waste accumulates. When food is stored, pests arrive. When animals are kept near houses, disease finds new pathways. When fields become essential, drought becomes more frightening. When houses stand beside ancestral graves, departure becomes not only a practical decision but an emotional wound. The village gives people a place to belong, and then asks a price for that belonging. In a mobile society, hardship can sometimes be answered with movement. If one valley fails, another may provide. If a camp becomes fouled, people leave it. If a resource is exhausted, the group shifts its attention elsewhere. This is not easy, and it does not mean mobile life is free from hunger or danger, but mobility spreads risk across space. Settled life changes that equation. The field cannot move when rainfall fails. The storage pit cannot walk away from rodents. The house cannot follow the herd. The community has invested labour into a particular place, and that labour becomes a kind of anchor. Every repaired wall, every cleared patch of ground, every buried ancestor, and every stored harvest makes leaving harder. What once appears as security can slowly become dependence. Disease is one of the most important shadows cast by settlement. Early villages bring people, animals, waste, and standing water into closer contact than many older patterns of life. Human bodies encounter new combinations of parasites, bacteria, and viruses. Herd animals contribute their own ecological pressures. Grain storage draws mice and other small animals, which bring fleas and contamination. Water sources used repeatedly by many households can become polluted. Smoke from indoor hearths affects lungs and eyes. The evidence remains incomplete in many regions, but skeletal remain settlement patterns, and later epidemiological understanding all suggest that dense living creates health burdens that earlier mobile groups often experience differently. Farming and village life can support more people, but not always healthier people. The human body records some of these costs. In various early agricultural populations, archaeologists have found evidence of dental cavities linked to carbohydrate-rich diets, heavy tooth wear from stone-ground flour, stress markers from childhood hardship, joint strain from repetitive labor, and signs of infectious disease. These patterns are not identical everywhere, and scholars still debate how sharply health declined in different regions during the transition to farming. Some communities adapt well, some rely on mixed diets that cushion the impact, some continue hunting, fishing, and gathering alongside cultivation. But the broader picture is sobering. The road toward larger settled societies is not simply paved with improvement, it is also paved with aching backs, damaged teeth, smoke-filled rooms, contaminated water, and the invisible movement of pathogens through crowded life. Food itself becomes both more reliable and more dangerous. Stored grain can prevent starvation, but it can spoil, mold burn, be stolen, or fail to last as long as expected. A field can produce abundance, but it can also be destroyed by drought, flood, insects, birds, grazing animals, disease, or human conflict. The more a community depends on a narrow range of crops, the more vulnerable it becomes to specific failures. Wild food traditions continue to matter because they provide alternatives, yet over generations some communities may lose part of the flexibility that once defined them. A village that has grown large on grain cannot simply return to small-scale foraging overnight. Too many mouths depend on the harvest. This is one of the deep traps of agricultural success. Abundance encourages population growth, and population growth makes abundance necessary. Crowding also changes social emotion. In a small mobile group, conflict can be managed partly through distance. People can split visit relatives elsewhere, or adjust movement patterns to reduce tension. In a village, neighbors remain neighbors. Disputes over fields, storage animals, marriage, inheritance, water labor, and ritual obligation can simmer for years because the people involved cannot easily disappear from each other's lives. A goat damages a garden. A boundary is disputed. A family is accused of taking more from a shared store than it deserves. A marriage alliance fails. A burial privilege is challenged. A ritual duty is neglected. These are small things from the perspective of kings and empires, but in the world before kingdoms they are the raw material of politics. The village produces politics before it produces the state. Inequality can grow from such tensions, though often slowly and unevenly. Some households may have more workers, some may control better land, some may possess more animals, some may store more grain, host larger feasts, or maintain stronger ties to distant exchange partners. Some may claim special relationships with ancestors or ritual spaces. At first, differences may be modest and fluid. A fortunate household may become generous one year and needy the next. A skilled organizer may gain prestige during a difficult harvest and lose influence afterward. But if advantages begin to pass from one generation to another, the village changes. Wealth stops being only a momentary condition and becomes a lineage story. Prestige hardens, obligation deepens. What survives in the record suggests that in some places this process remains limited for long periods, while in others it becomes one of the foundations of later hierarchy. Violence also takes on new forms. Conflict exists long before settlement, and it would be false to imagine mobile foragers as either perfectly peaceful or naturally warlike. Human groups have always been capable of cooperation and aggression, but settled life creates defendable and attackable targets. Stored food animals, houses, and fields can all be raided or destroyed. A village may become worth protecting because it contains accumulated labour. Walls, ditches, towers, restricted entrances, and settlement placement may reflect defence in some cases, though interpretation is often debated. Not every wall is a military wall. It may manage floods, animals, symbolic boundaries, or social space. Yet the possibility of attack becomes more consequential when wealth is fixed in place. A mobile group can flee with what it carries. A settled village can lose the work of generations in a single burning. Environmental damage adds another burden. Fields can exhaust soil if not managed carefully. Wood cutting can push fuel sources farther away. Herds can overgraze nearby land. Irrigation, where it later develops, can bring salinity and water disputes. Even before large states, human communities modify their surroundings in ways that create feedback. A village grows because the land supports it. Then the growing village presses harder on the land. The balance is delicate. Some communities manage it for centuries through fallowing mixed subsistence seasonal movement, burn-in practices, manure, shifting fields, or careful social rules. Others expand beyond what the local environment can sustain. No single explanation fully accounts for abandonment when it occurs because climate conflict, disease, soil trade, and social stress often interact. But the pattern is familiar across the ancient world. Settlement creates possibility, and possibility can overreach. There is also a psychological cost that cannot be excavated directly. To stay is to live among reminders. The house of a dead parent remains visible. A failed harvest is remembered in the storage room where food ran out. A conflict over land may attach itself to a boundary walked every day. A place of safety can also become a place of grief. Mobile people carry memory too, but settlement fixes memory into walls and ground. This can be comforting, even sacred. It can also be heavy. The village holds the dead close. It preserves family histories, rivalries, obligations, and losses. The same continuity that gives belonging can make change painful. Yet people continue to stay because the village also offers real advantages. It allows infants and children to be cared for in more stable spaces. It allows the elderly and injured to contribute through craft food processing, teaching, ritual and childcare. It supports larger social networks, more elaborate ceremonies, more reliable storage, more sustained craft production, and deeper relationships with land. It makes possible forms of beauty that require time, plastered walls, painted rooms, polished floors, carefully maintained burials, woven mats, shaped vessels, and places rebuilt across generations. The trouble with staying put does not erase the appeal of staying put. It makes the choice more complex. This complexity is the heart of the world before kingdoms. Human beings are not simply marching towards civilization with confidence. They are negotiating a bargain whose terms they do not fully control. Settlement gives them food memory and social depth, but it also gives them disease dependency, inequality, and conflict. It concentrates life until new solutions are needed. Some communities respond by returning to greater mobility. Some fragment, some shrink. Some move to new lands, some strengthen ritual bonds, some build defenses, Some develop leaders whose authority begins as practical coordination and slowly becomes something harder. The village without kings is therefore not a finished answer. It is a pressure chamber. Beneath its roofs and storage bins, new forms of power are beginning to take shape, not because anyone has invented royalty yet, but because staying together has made the old freedoms harder to preserve. The dead beneath the floor are among the most unsettling witnesses to the world before kingdoms. They lie not in distant cemeteries separated from daily life, but under platforms beneath packed clay near hearths, beside walls, and within the same domestic spaces where the living grind grain sleep repair tools prepare food and raise children. A house in such a world is not merely a shelter. It is a container of generations. The floor does not only support footsteps, it covers bodies. The walls do not only block wind, they hold the memory of people who once breathed, worked, suffered, and were mourned in the same enclosed space. To later minds, this closeness can feel strange, even disturbing. But in many early settled communities, the dead are not fully removed from the living. They remain part of the house, part of the claim to place, part of the quiet authority that gathers beneath ordinary life. This practice is not the same everywhere, and scholars still debate the meanings behind it. Some burials may mark affection, others may mark descent, household membership, ritual obligation, or claims to land. Some may belong to people considered especially important. Others may represent ordinary members of a domestic group. The evidence remains incomplete because grief does not fossilize, and the intentions behind burial rarely survive in a form that can be read directly. Yet the pattern itself is powerful. When people bury their dead beneath or near houses, they are binding memory to architecture. They are making the past physically present. Every time a floor is repaired, every time a platform is replastered, every time a new generation occupies the same dwelling, the living are literally standing over those who came before. In mobile societies, memory often travels through story song and landscape. A ridge spring cave, crossing, or grove may hold the presence of the dead because people remember events that happened there. In settled villages, that older landscape memory narrows and deepens into domestic space. The house becomes a small ancestral landscape. It has its own history, its own buried layers, its own traces of fire, repair, abandonment, and return. A household may gain prestige not through wealth, in a later royal sense, but through continuity. A house rebuilt many times in the same place associated with remembered dead and repeated ritual acts may carry authority simply because it appears old, rooted, and legitimate. What survives in the record suggests that some houses in early settlements are not equal in symbolic weight, even when they are not palaces. Their importance may come from the density of memory under their floors. The treatment of skulls reveals this relationship between the dead and social power with particular intensity. In several Neolithic communities of the Near East, human skulls were removed, modified, plastered, painted, displayed, buried separately, or circulated in ways that remain partly mysterious. At sites such as Jericho, plastered skulls with modelled faces and shell-inlaid eyes show a remarkable desire to restore or preserve the presence of the dead, not as skeletons, but as recognizable beings. These are not portraits in the modern sense, and no one can say with certainty whether they represent ancestors, special individuals, ritual figures, defeated enemies, or something more complex. But they reveal a startling fact: early communities sometimes return to the dead, alter them, and bring them back into social life. Death is not a clean boundary. The body can become a medium of memory and authority. The skull is a powerful object because it carries the face. Even after flesh is gone, it suggests identity more strongly than many other bones. To plaster a skull shape, features over it, and set shells where eyes once were, is to resist disappearance. It is also to control remembrance. Not every person receives such treatment. Selection matters, though the criteria are uncertain. Age, lineage, status, ritual role, personal charisma, or household history may all have played a part. No single explanation fully accounts for these practices across different sites. Still, the act itself creates a social difference among the dead, and social difference among the dead can reflect or create difference among the living. A household that possesses displays or claims connection to a powerful ancestor may gain weight in disputes over land marriage ritual access or stored food. At Çatalhöyük burials beneath house floors add another layer to the relationship between ancestry and domestic life. Some houses contain many burials accumulated over time, while others contain fewer. Bodies are often placed beneath platforms, and in some cases skulls are later removed. The interpretation remains debated, but the pattern suggests that houses are not merely occupied. They are curated. The living shape the memory of the dead through placement, reopening, removal, and rebuilding. A floor may be closed, opened, and closed again. A body may be whole, then incomplete. A skull may be taken and used elsewhere. Such acts imply that the dead are not forgotten after burial. They remain available to the social imagination. They can be revisited, transformed, and perhaps mobilized in moments when the living need legitimacy, continuity, or connection. Ancestor memory can help hold a community together, but it can also produce exclusion. If certain families claim deeper roots in a settlement, what happens to newcomers? If some houses contain revered dead, do their occupants gain stronger claims? If access to ancestral remains is controlled, does ritual knowledge become a form of power? These questions cannot always be answered directly, yet they matter because they point toward one of the hidden engines of later hierarchy. Kingdoms will eventually build power through dynasties, royal tombs, divine ancestors, and claims that present authority descends from an older sacred past. Long before King's Village households may already be experimenting with smaller versions of this logic. The past becomes a resource. Memory becomes something that can be shared, guarded, displayed, or inherited. The dead also help people endure the emotional cost of staying. In a settled world filled with disease, labor, crop risk, and conflict ancestry, gives suffering a larger frame. A field is not just soil if grandparents cleared it. A house is not just mud brick if generations lived and died inside it. A ritual is not just habit if it is believed to follow the ways of those before. Continuity can make hardship meaningful. It can tell people that their work belongs to a chain longer than one lifetime. But continuity can also trap. If the dead anchor people to a place, abandoning that place can feel like abandoning them. When drought, conflict, or exhaustion forces a settlement to disperse the buried dead, cannot all be carried away. Some ancestors remain behind, sealed beneath floors that no longer hear footsteps. There is a surprising tension in these early practices. On one hand, burial beneath houses suggest intimacy, belonging, and remembrance. On the other hand, the manipulation of skulls, selective treatment of bodies, and possible display of remains suggest that memory is not only tender, it can be formal, strategic, and even unsettling. The dead may comfort the living, but they may also be used to order them. A child growing up in a house where ancestors lie beneath a platform learns that identity is layered into the ground. The household is older than the child. Obligations existed before the child was born. The living are temporary occupants of a space already claimed by others. Such lessons need no written law. They are built into the floor. This matters because kingdoms will later depend on the ability to make people believe in authority that outlives individual bodies. A king dies, but kingship continues. A dynasty claims that the right to rule passes through blood, ritual, and memory. Temples and tombs make power appear ancient and inevitable. Before any of that exists, the village house teaches a smaller but related idea: the dead can authorize the living. The past can command without speaking. Ancestry can turn possession into belonging and belonging into obligation. The world before kingdoms is not yet ruled by royal genealogy, but it already understands that the dead are politically useful. Still, it would be wrong to reduce ancestor practices only to power. They are also acts of love, fear, grief, and longing. People do not carefully bury bodies, retrieve skulls, replaster faces, or maintain house floors only because of strategy. They do these things because death wounds the living and memory demands form. A buried body gives grief a location. A skull remade with eyes may allow a lost person to remain present in some transformed way. A house layered with burials may feel protected, watched, or blessed. The mystery is that the same act can be intimate and political at once. Human beings rarely separate those motives cleanly. As villages grow, the dead beneath the floor become part of a wider social architecture. Houses, fields, storage, exchange, ritual, and ancestry begin to reinforce one another. A household with land-stored grain, craft skill, distant connections, and honoured dead may stand differently from its neighbours. Not necessarily as a ruling house, not yet as a dynasty, but as something heavier, older, harder to challenge. The first inequalities may not always begin with warriors or wealth. Sometimes they begin with memory. A skull beneath plaster, a grave under a sleeping platform, a house rebuilt over older houses, a family able to point downward and say in effect, "This place remembers us." In the world before kingdoms, that may be enough to change everything. Long before roads are cut across kingdoms, objects are already travelling farther than most people will ever walk in a lifetime. A blade of black volcanic glass appears at a village far from the mountain where it was born. A shell from the sea rests in a settlement deep inland, polished by handling and pierced for stringing. A stone axe made from a rare green rock moves beyond its source, crossing valleys, rivers, and the territories of people who may never meet the final owner. Red ochre, amber, fine flint beads, pigments, animal teeth. Woven goods, stories, songs, and techniques pass from hand to hand across landscapes that later maps would divide into countries, provinces, and frontiers. In the world before kingdoms, there are no official trade routes, no coins, no royal caravans, no customs posts, no written contracts. Yet exchange already binds distant communities together in ways both practical and mysterious. This exchange does not always look like trade in the modern sense. A person may not set out as a merchant carrying goods to sell for profit. Objects can move through marriage ties, visiting kin, seasonal gatherings, ritual obligations, gift-giving alliance, making apprenticeship pilgrimage like journeys, or the slow chain of one group passing something to another. A shell may travel as a valued ornament, a token of relationship, a memory of a feast, or a sign that its wearer is connected to people beyond the local horizon. A blade of obsidian may be prized because it's extraordinarily sharp, but also because its dark, glassy surface seems unlike ordinary stone. A polished axe may be a tool, a prestige object, or both at once. The evidence remains incomplete because the intentions behind exchange rarely survive, but the distances themselves speak clearly. Early communities are not isolated. They're woven into networks. Obsidian is one of the most useful clues because its geological sources can often be identified with remarkable precision. Each volcanic source has a chemical signature, allowing researchers to trace pieces found in settlements back to specific mountains or flows. When obsidian appears hundreds of kilometers from its source, it reveals a hidden geography of contact. In Anatolia, the Caucasus, the Near East. The Aegean, and other regions obsidian moves through early networks long before empires control roads. The movement may not always be direct. A village near the source may exchange with another, which exchanges with another, until the material reaches people who have never seen the volcano itself. But even indirect movement matters. It shows that trust, recognition, obligation, and desire can link communities across empty spaces where no state exists to guarantee safety. The phrase empty spaces is misleading, of course. To later kingdoms, the lands beyond settlements may appear empty because they are not filled with cities, fields, or fortresses. To the people of the time, those spaces are known, named, crossed, feared, and remembered. A mountain pass is not empty if it carries stories of storms and ancestors. A desert edge is not empty if travellers know where seasonal water hides. A forest is not empty if it contains hunting grounds, dangerous spirits, beehives, medicinal plants, and paths marked only by memory. Exchange across such landscapes requires more than physical endurance. It requires social knowledge. Travellers must know where they are welcome, where they must bring gifts, where old disputes linger, where a certain stone can be collected, and where crossing without permission may bring violence. The movement of objects also moves ideas. This may be the most important part of early exchange and the hardest to trace. A sickle shape can travel. A pottery style can spread. A method of building, weaving, polishing stone, drilling beads, shaping ornaments, or treating the dead can pass between communities. Sometimes ideas move with people. A marriage partner brings a technique from another village. A craft specialist visits relatives. A group migrates after drought. A child raised between communities learns more than one tradition. Sometimes ideas move with objects. A beautifully made vessel may inspire imitation. A rare bead may become a local symbol of distant connection. A carved motif may be copied without its original meaning being fully understood. Scholars still debate how to distinguish migration, imitation, exchange, and independent invention in the archaeological record, but the broader pattern is unmistakable. The world before kingdoms is intellectually connected. Exchange can reduce risk. A village struck by poor harvest may rely on relations with people in another ecological zone. Mountain groups may exchange stone hides or animals for grain from lowland settlements. Coastal groups may provide shells, fish products, or salt. Inland groups may provide obsidian timber pigments or livestock. These arrangements need not be formal markets. They may be embedded in kinship and ritual, where giving and receiving are part of long-term obligation rather than immediate calculation. A gift given today may be answered years later in food, marriage, shelter, or support during conflict. Such systems are flexible but fragile. They depend on memory, reputation, and the fear of social shame. Without kings or courts, enforcement belongs to the relationship itself. Salt is one of the substances that may have carried particular importance, though its early movement is often difficult to trace because it dissolves, disappears, and leaves less obvious remains than stone. Human and animal bodies need it. Preserved foods may require it. Communities without local salt sources must obtain it somehow, whether from coasts, salt springs, brains, or mineral deposits. In later history, salt becomes a heavily controlled resource in many states. Before kingdoms, access to such essential materials may already shape travel exchange and social contact. The same is true of high-quality stone pigments and other materials unevenly distributed across the landscape. Geography creates dependence. Dependence creates relationships. Relationships create power, but exchange can also create inequality. Rare objects are never socially neutral for long. A person wearing distant shells, carrying an obsidian blade, or possessing a finely polished axe may signal connection beyond the local community. Such objects can mark participation in wide networks, ritual status, successful marriage alliances, or the ability to mobilize others. They can become gifts at feasts, offerings to the dead, or heirlooms passed down through households. The more difficult an object is to obtain, the more it can be used to display distinction. This does not mean early exchange automatically produces elites. Many communities circulate valuables precisely to prevent hoarding or to maintain bonds. But in some contexts, control over rare goods becomes a pathway toward prestige. A household connected to distant sources may gain influence that others cannot easily match. There is a subtle transformation here. In a small community, status may depend on personal skill, age, generosity, or ritual knowledge. With long-distance, exchange status can also depend on access. Who knows the route? Who has relatives beyond the valley? Who can speak with strangers? Who is trusted at gatherings? Who can obtain the rare stone, the red pigment, the seashell, the unusual bead? Access becomes a kind of invisible wealth. It lives not only in objects but in relationships. Later kingdoms will formalize this power through tribute taxation, controlled trade routes, and royal monopolies. Before kingdoms, the same principle exists in looser form. Some people stand at the crossings of social worlds, and that position gives them weight. Exchange also shapes imagination. A person in an inland village who touches a shell may never see the sea, yet the object proves that such a place exists. A child watching obsidian flake into an edge sharper than local stone may learn that distant mountains hold strange materials. A storyteller may describe people who build differently, bury differently, speak differently, or mark their bodies with unfamiliar ornaments. The horizon expands. Communities become aware that their own way of life is not the only way. This awareness can produce curiosity, rivalry, admiration, fear, or imitation. It can also create a wider sense of belonging, not to a kingdom, but to a world of connected places. These networks may help explain how major changes spread without armies. Farming does not move only because farmers march outward. It also spreads through contact exchange, intermarriage, borrowing, and local experimentation. Pottery styles can move faster than populations. Domesticated animals can be adopted by people who remain culturally distinct. Ritual practices can appear across regions because gatherings and exchange carry symbols with them. The archaeological record often reveals this unevenness. A crop appears without every other feature of the farming package. Pottery arrives before full agriculture. A burial custom spreads selectively. A tool type is copied in local material. Human change is rarely tidy. It travels through networks, and networks are messy. The world before kingdoms is therefore crossed by invisible roads. Not roads built of stone, not roads guarded by soldiers, but roads made of repeated footsteps, obligations, seasonal meetings, marriages, debts, and memories of safe passage. Along these routes move the materials that make life easier and the symbols that make life meaningful. A shell becomes a story of the sea. Obsidian becomes a fragment of a volcano. Ochre becomes colour carried from earth to skin wall or grave. A polished axe becomes both labour and display. Each object is small, yet together they reveal a world far larger than any single village. And as villages grow, these networks become even more important. Dense settlements need materials not found nearby. Ambitious households seek objects that mark distinction. Ritual gatherings require food, ornaments, pigments, and offerings. Craft specialists need reliable supplies. Alliances must be renewed. Outsiders must be welcomed, watched, or resisted. The more rooted communities become, the more they depend on movement beyond their roots. This is one of the great paradoxes before kingdom settlement does not end mobility. It reorganizes it. People may live in houses, bury their dead beneath floors, and cultivate fields, yet their social world stretches far beyond the village edge. Across landscapes still unmarked by royal borders, exchange carries the first hints of larger systems. It teaches people that power can travel, that value can be stored in rare things, and that a community's future may depend on connections far beyond what the eye can see. When villages grow too large, they become something more mysterious than simple settlements, and something less familiar than cities. They are dense with roofs, hearths, storage spaces. Bodies refuse smoke tools, animals, paths, obligations, and memories, but they do not always possess the features later history expects from urban life. There may be no palace, no obvious royal tomb, no central street laid out by planners, no written administration, no statue of a ruler, no army barracks, no clear government building standing above the rest. Instead, there is scale itself, and scale changes everything. A small village can rely on personal knowledge. Everyone knows the habits, kin, ties, failures, skills, and tempers of everyone else. A very large settlement cannot function only through intimacy. It needs customs strong enough to bind people who do not all know one another deeply. It needs shared practices, shared spaces, shared fears, and perhaps shared rituals powerful enough to keep a crowded human world from pulling apart. A large settlement before kingdoms is not merely a bigger village. It is a social experiment under pressure. More people mean more labour, more food production, more exchange, more marriages, more craft, more children, more elders, more disputes, more waste, and more memory. The settlement becomes noisy in ways the older camp never was. Grain is ground hour after hour. Animals bleat root low or scatter dust near the edges. Smoke rises from many hearths at once. Roofs require repair. Walls crack. Refuse must be moved or tolerated. Children run across spaces shaped by generations of rebuilding. People hear neighbours through walls, smell cooking from nearby houses, and learn that privacy is limited. A dense settlement creates a strange intimacy among people who may not be close kin. It presses lives together until society itself needs new forms. Çatalhöyük again offers a vivid example, not because it is the first or only large settlement, but because it shows how dense life can exist without the clear signs of a ruling class. Its houses are packed so closely that people likely move across rooftops rather than along open streets. Entry from above changes the experience of community. The roofscape becomes a shared surface, a place of movement, work, social contact, and perhaps watchfulness. Beneath it lie rooms layered with plaster burials, storage tools, wall art, and installations. The settlement grows not through a grand avenue or royal plan, but through repetition. Houses are built, used, filled, rebuilt, and remembered. What survives in the record suggests a place where household life remains central, even at considerable scale. The community is large, yet the house still holds much of the symbolic and social weight. This raises one of the central puzzles of the world before kingdoms. How can many people live together for centuries without obvious rulers? Scholars still debate the answer, and no single explanation fully accounts for the evidence. Some argue that strong shared ritual practices help maintain cohesion. Others emphasize household autonomy balanced by community norms. Some point to economic interdependence because dense settlements require cooperation in foodcraft exchange and labor. Others suggest that leadership exists but in forms that do not leave the monumental traces expected from later kings. Authority may be distributed among elders, ritual specialists, successful households, skilled organizers or temporary leaders who gain influence during particular tasks. The absence of a palace is not proof of perfect equality. It is proof that power has not yet chosen the architectural language of monarchy. As settlements expand, contradictions sharpen. People need one another more, yet they may trust one another less. Shared labour becomes essential, but so does household competition. A community may value similarity in houseform burial practice and daily routine because similarity reduces tension. If houses look broadly alike, if no single building towers above the rest, if ritual remains embedded in domestic life, then the settlement may be actively resisting overt hierarchy. Equality in this sense may not be natural or automatic. It may require work. It may require customs that shame arrogance, redistribute food, through feasts limit hoarding, or prevent any one household from openly dominating. The evidence remains incomplete, but many anthropologists have noted that egalitarian societies often maintain equality through social pressure, not through lack of ambition. People may desire prestige, but the community may keep ambition from hardening into rule. At the same time, hidden differences can grow beneath visible sameness. One house may contain more burials than another. One household may maintain older ties to a meaningful building. One family may have better access to exchange goods, productive land herds, or ritual knowledge. Some people may craft objects others cannot make. Some may travel farther and return with rare materials. Some may host gatherings. Some may remember genealogies more effectively. These differences are subtle compared with later royal splendor, but subtle does not mean insignificant. A society can look relatively even from above while containing many small imbalances below. Over generations, small imbalances can become traditions, and traditions can become claims. Large settlements also face ecological strain. A few households can gather firewood nearby for a time. Hundreds or thousands of people need far more. Fuel sources retreat from the settlement. Fields expand. Grazing animals pressure surrounding vegetation. Waste accumulates. Water must be obtained repeatedly. Clay timber reeds, stone plaster materials, and other building resources must be gathered and transported. The settlement becomes a mouth constantly drawing in the landscape. The larger it grows, the wider its hunger becomes. This does not mean collapse is inevitable. Human communities are clever, and many manage resources through experience, movement, exchange, and adjustment. But density creates dependency on systems that must keep working. If one part fails, the effects ripple through many lives. Conflict leaves traces, but not always in ways easy to interpret. Some large settlements show signs of burning abandonment, rebuilding crowding, or bodily injury. Yet fire can be accidental, ritual, domestic, or violent. Abandonment can result from climate disease, social tension, soil exhaustion, shifting trade, or deliberate relocation. Injuries can come from accidents, interpersonal violence, warfare, or work. Archaeology rarely gives simple answers. What it does reveal is that large communities, before kingdoms, are not frozen in harmony. They change, they absorb stress, they reorganize. Sometimes they persist for centuries, and sometimes they thin out, fragment, or vanish from prominence. The mystery is not that some fail. The mystery is that many succeed for as long as they do without the later institutions thought necessary for large-scale order. In parts of Eastern Europe, later prehistoric megasites associated with the Cucuteni Tripilia tradition show another form of large settlement life, with enormous planned or semi-planned layouts, many houses and signs of repeated burning and rebuilding. These sites emerge much later than the earliest Neolithic villages, but they belong to the broader story of large communities before full state systems in their regions. Their scale is astonishing, and their organization remains debated. Were they permanently occupied at full population? Were they seasonal aggregation centres? How were they governed? Why were houses burned? The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars continue to test competing explanations. Yet these places reinforce the larger point long before kingdoms dominate history. Human beings repeatedly create large, complex, coordinated settlements that do not fit neatly into the categories of village, city, or state. Scale also changes imagination. A person born into a small group understands society through faces. A person born into a dense settlement understands society through repeated patterns, the layout of houses, the timing of work, the movement across roofs or paths, the expectation of shared practices, the presence of many people who are familiar but not intimate. Community becomes less like an extended family and more like an environment. It surrounds the individual. It is there before birth and remains after death. It has its own rhythms, rules, and memories. This is one of the quiet steps towards civilization in the later sense. The social world becomes larger than personal relationships even before it is administered by officials. Large settlements before kingdoms therefore stand at a threshold. They demonstrate the power of cooperation without monarchy, but they also reveal why new forms of authority may eventually emerge. More people require more coordination. More storage invites more control. More ritual creates more specialized knowledge. More exchange creates more unequal access. More ancestors create deeper claims. More crowding creates more disputes. A community may manage all this through custom for a long time, but the pressures do not disappear. They accumulate like debris under rebuilt floors. The world before kingdoms is now thick with human experiment. It has wanderers who know landscapes by season, settled houses built over the dead grain stored against hunger feasts, that bind and compete exchange networks crossing vast distances, and settlements large enough to challenge older forms of social life. Yet there is still no inevitable king waiting at the centre. The next shift is more elusive. It begins not with a crown, but with difference, one burial richer than another, one house older than another, one family better connected, one ritual specialist more necessary, one storehouse more guarded, one leader more often followed. At first, these differences are small enough to seem ordinary. Over time, they become the first signs of inequality, and the long road toward formal power grows darker and more visible. The first signs of inequality rarely appear as crowns. They appear as differences that could almost be overlooked: a burial with more ornaments than another, a house that has been rebuilt more often, a child placed in the ground with objects that no child could have earned through personal achievement, a storage area larger than its neighbours, a rare stone object resting where most people possess only local materials, a ritual space used by some households more than others. These are not yet the dazzling inequalities of later kingdoms. There are no royal pyramids, no treasure-filled tombs guarded by inscriptions, no carved scenes of defeated enemies kneeling beneath a ruler's feet. But the shape of difference is beginning to harden. Some people, some houses, some lineages, and some kinds of knowledge seem to carry more weight than others. In the world before, kingdom's hierarchy does not arrive all at once. It seeps into daily life through memory, labor access, and inheritance. This is one of the most difficult transformations to trace because inequality can be visible in many ways and hidden in many more. Archaeologists can measure house size, count grave goods, analyze diet through bones and teeth, trace the origins of exotic materials, study signs of labor stress, and compare access to valued objects. But social rank is not always written clearly into the ground. A person with few grave goods may have been powerful in life, if their community did not express status through burial. A rich burial may reflect ritual role rather than political authority. A large house may shelter many people rather than a wealthy family. A rare object may be sacred, inherited, traded, or accidental. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate how to read the earliest differences. Yet across many regions, a broad pattern emerges as communities become more settled, productive, and connected. Opportunities for lasting advantage multiply. One of the deepest changes is inheritance. In a mobile group, valuable possessions often remain limited by what can be carried, shared, or replaced. Status may depend heavily on personal skill, generosity, age, knowledge, or success in particular moments. In settled villages, more things can accumulate in place. Houses can be passed down, storage facilities can be maintained, fields can be improved and remembered, herds can grow, craft knowledge can stay within families. Ancestral claims can attach to particular floors, graves, and plots of land. When advantage survives the death of the individual, inequality changes character. It becomes less temporary. It begins to belong to a household, a lineage, or a remembered past. This does not create kings immediately, but it creates the kind of social memory from which kingship will later draw strength. Child burials are among the most powerful clues. When an adult is buried with valued goods, it is possible to argue that the objects reflect achievements in life: skill, leadership, ritual role, exchange, success, or personal reputation. But when a child is buried with rare ornaments, special treatment, or objects requiring substantial labor, a different possibility appears. The child may have inherited status from family or lineage. Not every richly furnished child burial proves hereditary hierarchy, and interpretations must remain cautious. Grief can lead families to lavish care on the young. Ritual meanings may not match later assumptions about wealth, but repeated patterns of differential treatment among children are hard to ignore. They suggest that in some communities who a person is born to begins to matter in ways that outlast individual ability. A quiet boundary is crossed when status can precede achievement. Diet can also reveal difference. Bones and teeth sometimes preserve chemical signatures of what people ate and where they lived. In some early communities, isotopic analysis suggests variation in access to animal protein cultivated foods or resources from particular landscapes. Dental health may differ, labor stress may differ, injuries may differ. Such evidence is complex and never speaks alone, but it can show that social distinctions are entering the body. Inequality is not only displayed through ornaments, it is eaten. It is carried in the spine from repetitive work. It appears in worn joints, childhood stress markers, and teeth damaged by different diets. Later kingdoms will record tribute labor obligations and class divisions in administrative texts. Before writing, the body itself sometimes becomes the archive. Craft production adds another layer. As settled communities grow, some people become especially skilled at making pottery beads. Textiles, polished axes, stone blades, plaster ornaments, or ritual objects. Specialization does not automatically produce inequality. A skilled craftsperson may be respected but not socially dominant. Their work may circulate through reciprocal exchange rather than market control. But specialization can create dependence. If only certain people know how to make valued objects, control rare materials, or perform difficult techniques, their position changes. Knowledge becomes a resource. Time also becomes a resource. A person who spends many hours making fine beads or decorated vessels must be supported somehow, either by their household, by exchange partners, or by a wider community. This means food production, craft, and social status begin to intertwine. The control of rare materials may be even more important. Obsidian, marine shells, copper, in later contexts pigments, fine stone, and other valued substances are not evenly distributed across the landscape. A household or group with strong access to exchange networks can obtain objects others cannot. At first, such objects may circulate widely through gift-giving and ritual. But if access becomes restricted, prestige can accumulate around those who control the flow. A person who can bring distant materials into the village becomes a bridge to the wider world. A lineage that repeatedly hosts exchange partners or guards a route may gain influence. What survives in the record suggests that long-distance goods often appear in contexts of display, burial, or ritual, all settings where social meaning is intensified. Rare objects do not create hierarchy by themselves, but they give hierarchy a language. Ritual authority may be another early pathway toward inequality. In many communities before kingdom, spiritual or ceremonial knowledge is likely distributed unevenly. Some people know the correct timing of gatherings, the meanings of symbols, the treatment of ancestors, the handling of dangerous objects, or the traditions tied to special places. Such authority may begin as service rather than domination. A ritual specialist protects the community, remembers procedures, mediates between the living and the dead, or organizes ceremonies that reduce fear. But the person who controls access to meaning can become difficult to challenge. When crops fail, when disease spreads, when conflict rises, people may turn more urgently toward those believed to understand hidden forces. In times of uncertainty, ritual knowledge can become political power without changing its name. Feasting already present before full farming becomes especially potent in unequal settings. A household that can provide large quantities of food gains prestige through generosity. Yet generosity is rarely innocent when repeated across generations. Those who give publicly create obligations. Those who receive may owe support, labor loyalty, marriage ties, or future gifts. A feast can redistribute resources, but it can also advertise surplus. It can show that one group has more grain, more animals, more storage, more allies, or better access to ritual authority. This is the dry understatement of early power. Sometimes domination begins as dinner. No one needs to declare themselves ruler if everyone already knows which house can feed the crowd. Gender and age likely shape these inequalities in ways the archaeological record only partly reveals. The labor of cultivating, grinding, weaving, carrying water, preparing food, raising children, tending animals, and maintaining households is enormous, yet much of it remains invisible in later heroic narratives. Early settled life may increase some burdens dramatically, especially repetitive food processing and domestic labor. At the same time, age can bring authority through memory, skill, and control of knowledge. Elders may know genealogies, land claims, ritual sequences, planting times, and exchange obligations. Young adults may provide labor and defense. Children may inherit identity before they understand it. Inequality, therefore, does not form along a single line. It grows through the overlapping realities of household body age, gender, labor, ancestry, and access. Still, many early communities appear to resist extreme hierarchy for long periods. This resistance is important. The road to kingship is not automatic. Some societies develop mechanisms to restrain ambition. Ridicule, withdrawal of support, food-sharing, communal decision-making, ritual leveling, or the refusal to let prestige become command. A successful hunter-host craftsperson or ritual expert may gain admiration without gaining the right to rule. People can value skill while distrusting arrogance. This means the emergence of inequality is not simply a story of people becoming passive before power. it is also a story of tension between ambition and restraint. No single explanation fully accounts for why some communities hold the line while others move towards stronger hierarchy. Local ecology, population density, warfare, storage, trade ritual, and historical accident all matter. The first signs of inequality become dangerous when differences begin to reinforce one another. A household with better land produces more grain. More grain allows larger feasts. Larger feasts create obligations. Obligations bring labour. Labour improves fields, houses, storage, and ritual display. Better exchange ties bring rare goods. Rare goods enhance status in burial and ceremony. Honoured ancestors strengthen claims to place. Children inherit the whole bundle. At that point, inequality is no longer a single advantage. It is a system of advantages feeding itself. The world before kingdoms has not yet produced kings, but it has begun to produce the conditions in which some people can stand above others and make that position appear natural, ancient, useful, or sacred. This is the quiet turning point. The village that once held people together through shared labour and memory now contains internal weight. Some houses feel older. Some names carry more obligation. Some bodies work harder. Some graves speak louder. Some objects travel farther. Some hands control storage, ritual exchange, or decision-making more often than others. The transformation is not always violent. It may appear as respect, gratitude, tradition, protection, or devotion. That is what makes it so powerful. Hierarchy often grows most securely when it does not yet look like coercion. The first kingdoms will one day claim divine favour, military strength, and the right to command. But beneath those claims lies this older soil of unequal memory, unequal access, and unequal inheritance. Before there are kings, there are people who have learned that power can be stored, passed on, displayed hidden, and made to seem as old as the dead beneath the floor. Climate does not need a crown to rule human life. It does not issue commands, does not send messengers, does not carve its name into stone, and yet it reaches into every storage pit, every field, every river, crossing every herd path, every marriage plan, and every buried hope of an early village. The world before kingdoms is shaped by people, but it is never controlled by them. Rainfall shifts. Rivers flood too high or too low. Springs weaken. Forests advance or retreat. Grasslands dry. Pests arrive. Cold returns unexpectedly. A lake that once held fish shrinks into mud. A marsh expands where fields once stood. Soil that fed several generations grows tired under repeated use. To a mobile group, such change is dangerous. To a settled community, it can become existential. The village has roots now, and roots can starve when the ground changes beneath them. The first great crises of settled life are not always dramatic enough to leave a single obvious scar. They often unfold through accumulation. One poor harvest can be endured if storage is strong. 2 bad seasons create tension. A decade of unreliable rainfall can alter births, deaths, marriages, exchange, and trust. Families may begin withholding food from communal obligations. Feasts shrink or become more competitive. Young people may leave. Elders may insist on older rituals with greater urgency. Herds may be moved farther away. Fields may be pushed into marginal ground. Arguments over water or grazing may harden into violence. The evidence remains incomplete because desperation rarely leaves neat labels behind. What survives are abandoned houses, changed diets, burned layers, shifted settlement patterns, stressed bones, repaired walls, empty storage pits, and the long silence of places that people once expected to last. Drought is among the most powerful forces in this story, especially in regions where early agriculture depends on seasonal rainfall. A crop is a promise made to weather. Seeds are placed into the ground because people expect the sky and soil to behave within a known range. When that range changes, knowledge built over generations can become uncertain. A dry year may not destroy a community that still gathers wild foods, hunts, trades, or stores grain. But as population grows and dependence on cultivated plants deepens, the margin narrows. More people require more food. More fields require more predictable rain. More animals require more pasture and water. A settlement that once seemed perfectly placed can become a trap if the environmental balance shifts. No single explanation fully accounts for every abandonment, but drought often acts as a pressure that reveals weaknesses already present. Flood can be just as destructive and sometimes more deceptive. Rivers are attractive because they bring water, fish, fertile soil, transport reeds, wild animals, and later irrigation possibilities. But rivers are not obedient. A flood can renew land with silt, or it can tear through houses, drown stores, spread disease, and bury fields under useless sediment. In alluvial landscapes, channels move. A community may build near a watercourse that later shifts away, leaving fields dry and transport harder. Another may suffer when water cuts too close. Early settlements along rivers must live with the fact that the same force sustaining them can erase them. Later kingdoms will build canals, levees, drainage systems, and administrative labour around this problem. Before kingdoms, communities manage water through local knowledge, cooperation, and adaptation, but their tools are limited by scale. Soil exhaustion is a quieter crisis. It does not arrive with thunder or a wall of water. It appears in smaller harvests, thinner stalks, fields needing longer rest, weeds changing grazing pressure, increasing, and fuel sources moving farther from the settlement. Early farmers may understand many practical ways to manage land-shifting fields, fallowing, adding manure, mixing crops, moving herds, burning vegetation, or relying on wild foods when crops disappoint. But a growing settlement can press hard against its surroundings. The land near the village carries the burden of repeated harvest, repeated grazing, repeated wood cutting, repeated clay extraction, repeated foot traffic. Human success leaves a footprint, and when that footprint deepens, people must either change their practices, expand outward trade more heavily, reduce population, or move. Sometimes crisis leads not to collapse but to invention. Environmental pressure can encourage new storage methods, broader diets, stronger exchange ties, more careful planting movement into new ecological zones, or more formal cooperation. A community facing uncertain rainfall may diversify its crops. A village under pressure from fuel scarcity may shift building methods. A group with poor harvests may intensify relationships with herders, fishers, or neighbouring settlements. In this sense, crisis is not only destruction, it is also a test of flexibility. The world before kingdoms is filled with communities that solve problems without leaving grand monuments to their solutions. They adjust, borrow, migrate, split, return, and improvise. Much of their success disappears because ordinary survival leaves fewer traces than disaster. Yet not all communities can adapt in place. Abandonment is one of the most haunting patterns in archaeology because it can look like disappearance when it may actually be transformation. A settlement empties, houses fall, roofs collapse, wind enters rooms that once smelled of smoke and food. Seeds sprout in abandoned courtyards. Animals move through openings where people once stepped carefully. But the people themselves may not vanish. They may join relatives elsewhere, found new villages, return to seasonal mobility, move toward better water, or become part of emerging communities in neighbouring regions. Later observers often look for a single dramatic end, but many ancient abandonments are not endings in that sense. They are reorganizations of human life across the landscape. A place dies while its people continue. The pain of leaving, however, should not be underestimated. By this stage in the long story, a settlement is more than a practical camp. It contains ancestors beneath floors, storage pits dug by parents, fields cleared by grandparents, pathways worn by children, ritual places visited for generations, and house walls layered with repair. To abandon such a place is to tear a social world from its ground. Some objects may be carried, others must be left. The dead cannot all be moved. The house cannot travel. Even if departure is necessary, it may require ritual closure, burning burial of objects, or deliberate filling of rooms. Scholars still debate the meaning of burned houses and abandonment deposits at many sites. Some may result from accident or attack. Others may be intentional acts of closure, ways of ending a house properly before memory moves elsewhere. The evidence remains uncertain, but the emotional logic is plausible. People who have learned to root identity and place may need ceremonies to survive uprooting. Climate pressure can also sharpen inequality. In times of abundance, differences may be softened by sharing. In times of scarcity, control over storage, water herds, trade partners, or ritual authority becomes more consequential. A household with large reserves can feed dependence and gain loyalty. A ritual leader who promises to restore balance may gain influence. A group controlling a spring granary or exchange route can bargain from strength. Crisis does not automatically create hierarchy, but it can accelerate it. People under stress may accept stronger leadership if coordination seems necessary. They may follow someone who can organize defense, negotiate exchange, manage labor, predict seasons, or speak convincingly for the ancestors. Power often grows when fear needs a human shape. Conflict between communities may intensify under environmental strain. If pasture dries in one region, herders may move into land used by others. If fields fail, raiding stored grain becomes more tempting. If water sources shrink, access becomes a matter of survival. Fortified sites, defensive locations, weapon injuries, and burned settlements may in some cases reflect such pressures, though interpretation must remain careful. Not every weapon is evidence of war. Not every burned village is a massacre. But the broader logic is clear enough: settled wealth creates targets, and climate stress increases the temptation to take what cannot be grown. Before kingdoms build armies, communities already face the problem of organized violence. At the same time, environmental change can open new opportunities for ambitious leaders. Someone who coordinates irrigation drainage terraces, storage field allocation, or large-scale ritual response can gain durable authority. At first, such leadership may be practical and temporary. A respected organizer helps solve an urgent problem. But if the problem repeats year after year, the role can become permanent. If the role is tied to a lineage, an office, a sacred place, or control of stored resources, it can become institutional. This is one of the bridges from village life toward more formal power. The environment creates recurring challenges, and recurring challenges favor recurring leadership. A community may not intend to create rulers. It may simply keep turning to the same people or the same families until authority becomes expected. Still, the world before kingdoms remains varied. Some groups respond to stress by becoming more centralized. Others become more mobile. Some merge into larger communities. Others fragment into smaller, more flexible units. Some intensify farming. Others return more heavily to fishing, herding, hunting, or gathering. This diversity matters because it prevents a simple story. Agriculture does not force states into existence everywhere. Climate crisis does not always produce kings. Settlement does not always lead to hierarchy. Human beings make choices within constraints, and those choices produce many possible futures. The first kingdoms emerge only where certain pressures, opportunities, traditions, and accidents converge. The crisis and abandonment of early communities therefore form a crucial turning point. They reveal that the village is powerful but fragile. Storage can fail. Fields can dry. Ancestors can anchor people to dangerous places. Inequality can deepen when food is scarce. Exchange networks can rescue or entangle. Ritual can comfort or control. Leadership can solve problems or begin to dominate. The world before kingdoms is no longer simply experimenting with settlement, it is discovering the cost of complexity. The more people build, store, inherit, and remember, the more they must protect. The more they protect, the more they need coordination. And from coordination under pressure, the road toward formal power begins to open not as a sudden invention, but as a response to fear, labor abundance, and the stubborn refusal of the earth to remain predictable. The road toward power begins in forms so ordinary that later history almost hides them. A person stands before others and knows how to settle a quarrel before it becomes bloodshed. Another remembers which households owe grain after a bad season. Another can call distant relatives to help repair a wall, clear a field, or defend a spring. Another knows the ceremonies that must be performed when a house is closed, when a child is buried, when rain fails, when hunters return, when strangers arrive with rare stone or shells from the sea. None of these people needs to be a king. None may even want to rule in the later sense. Yet each holds a fragment of authority. In a world of larger villages, deeper storage, stronger ancestors, wider exchange, and sharper crisis, those fragments begin to matter more. Power does not first appear as a crown. It appears as usefulness repeated until it becomes expectation. At first, leadership may be temporary. A skilled hunter leads during a difficult chase, then returns to ordinary life. A respected elder guides a marriage negotiation, then sits again among kin. A ritual specialist presides over a burial or feast, but does not command the harvest. A strong organizer directs the repair of a ditch, wall, roof, or storage area, but cannot force obedience beyond the task. This flexible authority suits communities that distrust arrogance and rely on custom rather than coercion. It allows people to follow competence without surrendering independence. The evidence remains incomplete because such social arrangements rarely leave clear material signatures. But many ethnographic and archaeological comparisons suggest that early leadership often begins as situational influence, not permanent office. The problem is that repeated situations can harden. If a settlement floods every few years, the person who organizes labor to manage water becomes important every few years. If harvest storage must be counted and protected every season, those trusted with storage become important every season. If exchange partners arrive at predictable gatherings, those who control the relationships become important each time goods move. If ritual specialists are needed whenever crops fail, disease spreads, or ancestors must be honored, their authority is renewed by each crisis. Over time, the community may stop asking whether such people should lead. It simply turns toward them because that is what has always worked. Habit is one of the oldest foundations of power. Surplus gives this process material weight. A leader who only speaks must persuade each time. A leader connected to stored food can reward rescue and obligate. Grain animals, tools, and rare goods make influence durable. A household with large reserves can feed workers during communal construction. It can sponsor feasts, support craft specialists, help poorer families survive a failed harvest, or provide offerings in ritual events. Such acts may be remembered as generosity, and perhaps they are generous. But generosity can create dependence. Those who receive food during hunger may later owe labor loyalty or support in disputes. The line between protection and domination is thin, especially when hunger stands on one side of it. Temple shrines and communal ritual spaces also begin to change the nature of authority. Earlier sacred places may be embedded in houses, caves, or gathering landscapes. But as communities grow, some ritual spaces become more formal, more central, or more heavily maintained. A structure set apart from ordinary dwellings can focus collective attention. It can store offerings, host ceremonies, organize labor, and embody the idea that the community is more than a cluster of households. Those who serve such places may gain influence not because they own fields, but because they stand near meaning. They know the calendar, the offerings, the stories, the ancestors, the proper order of acts. In later states, temples will often become economic centers as well as sacred ones, holding land, receiving goods, employing specialists, and legitimizing rulers. Before kingdoms, the earlier steps toward that fusion may already be visible, though scholars still debate how directly particular structures should be interpreted as temples or communal ritual buildings. Fortified places add a harsher dimension. As wealth becomes fixed in grain, animals' houses and storage protection grows more important. Some communities choose defensible locations, build walls, dig ditches, restrict access, or create lookout points. The meaning of these features is not always straightforward. A wall may defend against enemies, control animals, mark identity, reduce flooding, or display collective strength. But even symbolic walls change social life. They define an inside and an outside. They create gates, and gates create the possibility of gatekeepers. They require labor, and labor requires organization. If danger repeats, those who coordinate defense can gain lasting authority. A war leader, in a moment of crisis, can become something more permanent when crisis becomes part of the community's memory. Specialists further complicate the road toward power. Potters, metalworkers in later periods, stone knappers, weavers, builders, ritual experts, traders, herders and healers all hold knowledge that others need. Specialization increases efficiency, but it also creates dependency. A community that relies on certain crafts must support the people who practice them. Support requires surplus. Surplus requires coordination. Coordination creates opportunities for managers, elders, ritual authorities, or emerging chiefs to place themselves between producers and consumers. No single explanation fully accounts for how specialists became tied to early power, and the process differs by region, but the pattern is important. As work becomes more divided, society needs stronger systems to keep goods, labor, and obligations moving. The management of exchange may be especially important. A person who can bring obsidian, shell, copper, fine stone salt pigments, or livestock from distant regions does more than move objects. They connect worlds. They know the people beyond the horizon. The marriage ties the dangers, the correct gifts, the route around hostile places, the season, when travel is possible. Such knowledge can become political. A leader who controls exchange can decide who receives rare objects, who is honored in burial, who is equipped for ritual, and who gains the visible signs of prestige. In many societies, distant goods become associated with high status, precisely because they prove access to a larger world. Before kingdoms control trade routes with armies and officials, ambitious households may already be learning that power flows along paths. The shift from chief to king is not the same everywhere, and in many places it does not happen at all. Some communities remain organized through councils, elders, ritual groups, or relatively balanced household networks for long periods. Others develop chiefs who lead through prestige redistribution, warfare, ritual authority, or control of resources, but whose power remains limited by custom. A king in the stronger sense requires more. He or she must possess authority that outlasts a single task, reaches beyond one household, and becomes attached to an office, lineage, sacred role, or territory. That transformation depends on belief as much as force. People must come to accept that command itself has legitimacy, that some individuals are entitled to direct labor, collect surplus, judge disputes, or speak for the community as a whole. This is where ritual and ancestry become deeply dangerous. A powerful household with honored dead can claim that its authority is not new ambition but old obligation. A leader who sponsors ceremonies can appear necessary to cosmic balance, rainfall, fertility, victory, or the favor of ancestors. A lineage that controls a shrine, storehouse, or exchange route can wrap practical power in sacred memory. Later kings will master this language. They will claim descent from gods, heroes, ancestors, or founders. But the grammar of that claim begins earlier in villages where houses remember their dead and special places gather offerings. What survives in the record suggests that before kingship becomes formal, communities are already learning to connect leadership with the past, with ritual, and with the survival of the group. Population growth pushes the process further. A small community can debate face to face. A large one needs representatives, mediators, organizers, or authorities trusted to act when not everyone can be present. When settlements multiply across a region, relationships between them become more complex. Alliances, rivalries, raids, marriages, seasonal gatherings, and resource disputes require negotiation. Leaders who can speak not only for a household, but for a whole settlement become valuable. Over time, some settlements may dominate others through size, location, ritual prestige, military strength, or control of exchange. The first political landscapes emerge not yet kingdoms with fixed borders, but clusters of communities arranged around influence. A central place draws people, goods, and obligations inward. Peripheral places respond, resist, or depend. The rise of power is therefore not only about domination from above, it is also about problems from below. People need food, stored water, managed disputes, settled labor, organized rituals performed, enemies, watched exchanges maintained, and memory preserved. Stronger authority can answer real needs. This is why hierarchy can grow even among people who value autonomy. It offers coordination, it promises protection, it reduces uncertainty or appears to. The danger is that a tool created to solve shared problems can become a structure that serves itself. The organizer becomes the manager becomes the office holder becomes the ruler, the gift becomes tribute, the storehouse becomes taxation, the sacred duty becomes political obedience. Still, nothing about this road is inevitable. Some communities step toward power and step back. Some abandon large settlements rather than accept domination. Some maintain balance through councils, kinship, ridicule, ritual leveling, or migration. Some leaders fail because they demand too much. Some lineages lose prestige when harvests fail or enemies succeed. The world before kingdoms remains full of alternatives, and that is important. Kingship is not the natural destiny of human life. It is one historical solution, powerful and dangerous, that emerges under particular pressures. For most of human existence, people live without it. Even after the first kingdom's rise, many societies continue outside royal control, trading with states resisting them, fleeing them, or ignoring them when distance allows. Yet in certain river valleys, plains, and fertile corridors, the pressures converge. Settlements grow, surplus accumulates, Ritual centers attract labor, exchange networks widen, conflict makes defense urgent, climate instability makes coordination valuable, inequality becomes inherited, ancestors legitimize claims, specialists need support, storehouses require guardians, and somewhere within this tightening web the idea of command changes. Leadership is no longer only something people grant temporarily. It becomes something claimed, inherited, defended, and made sacred. The first kingdoms will soon appear in landscapes already prepared by thousands of years of human experiment. When they rise, they will seem to later history like beginnings. But they are not beginnings, they are consequences. The world before kingdoms does not vanish when power takes shape, it remains underneath. The old seasonal paths become trade routes, the feasts become tribute ceremonies, the ancestors beneath house floors become dynastic tombs, the communal store becomes the royal granary, the ritual specialist becomes priest administrator or sacred ruler, the defended village becomes fortress and city, the exchange network becomes state economy, the leader who once organized labor for survival becomes the figure who commands labor as right. The road toward power is built from familiar stones, each one laid down by people solving immediate problems. That is what makes the emergence of kingdoms so haunting. They are not imposed on an empty world. They grow from the deepest habits of settled human life, from the need to remember to store, to gather, to protect, to explain crisis, and to believe that someone can hold uncertainty at bay. The first kingdoms inherit a world already crowded with human invention. They do not rise over emptiness, and they do not create order where none existed before. Beneath the first palaces lie older houses. Beneath the first temples lie older sacred places. Beneath the first tax systems lie older habits of storage, sharing debt and obligation. Beneath the first royal genealogies lie older ancestors buried under floors, remembered in settlements, carried in stories and used to bind people to land. Beneath the first trade routes lie older paths followed by foragers, herders, craft specialists, marriage partners, and travellers carrying obsidian shells, pigments, salt stone and news across landscapes without borders. What later rulers claim as civilization is in many ways the inheritance of people who lived for thousands of years without kings. This inheritance matters because kingdoms are often remembered through their most visible forms. A king's name survives on a tablet. A palace wall remains in the ground. A tomb preserves gold weapons, seals, or carved symbols. A monumental temple forces the eye upward. A law code gives the impression that order begins when authority writes itself down. But written records are late and selective. They preserve the voices of administrators, rulers, priests, and elites, far more often than the voices of farmers, herders, potters, builders, mothers, children, migrants, servants, and ordinary villagers. The world before kingdoms is harder to hear because it did not speak in the official language of power. Yet it shaped almost everything power later used. The first states in Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus region, China, Mesoamerica, the Andes and other parts of the world emerge under different conditions and at different times. No single pathway explains them all. In some places, river systems encourage irrigation, transport, dense farming and coordination. In others, competition between settlements, ritual centralization, trade warfare or environmental management may play larger roles. Scholars still debate the balance of causes in each region, and the evidence remains incomplete. Yet across these diverse landscapes a familiar pattern appears. Before kingdoms become visible, people have already learned to settle, produce, surplus, organize labor exchange across distance, bury the dead in meaningful ways, manage ritual mark status, and live within communities larger than intimate kin groups. Kingship arrives late in a story whose foundations are already deep. This is why the phrase "before civilization" can be misleading. If civilization means palaces, writing cities, bureaucracy and formal kingship, then much of the older world stands outside it. But if civilization means the slow creation of durable human worlds with memory craft, moral rules, symbolic life exchange architecture, food systems and landscapes shaped by generations, then civilization begins long before kingdoms. It begins in camps returned across centuries, in tools made with learned precision, in painted caves, in burials prepared with care, in wild grain, harvested before domestication, in feasts large enough to bind scattered people, in villages that endure without rulers, and in houses where the dead remain beneath the living. The first kingdoms inherit not savagery but complexity. Their achievement is real, but it is not pure creation. Kingdoms can coordinate labor at astonishing scale. They can build canals, walls, pyramids, ziggurats, roads, storehouses, fleets and armies. They can organize calendars, taxation law, writing and long-distance administration. They can preserve knowledge, sponsor craft, standardize measures, defend territories and create identities larger than any village. But they also concentrate power, extract labor, formalize inequality, wage war and turn surplus into tribute. The older world before kingdoms contains both the promise and the warning. Cooperation can become monument, storage can become taxation, ritual can become obedience, leadership can become domination, memory can become propaganda. The same human capacities that allow communities to survive can also allow rulers to command them. The legacy of the pre-kingdom world survives even after monarchs appear. In early states, most people still live close to soil animals, water seasons, and household labor. The king may stand at the symbolic center, but daily life remains built on older rhythms: planting, harvesting, grinding, weaving, herding, cooking, repairing, burying, remembering, marrying, exchanging, and fearing drought. Villages do not disappear when kingdoms rise. They become subject to larger systems, but they continue to carry older traditions. In many regions, people live at the edge of state control, or beyond it, entirely moving between farming, herding, foraging, and trade. Kingdoms may draw borders on claystone or imagination, but human life often remains more fluid than royal maps admit. There is also a deeper legacy in the idea of belonging. Long before a kingdom claims territory, communities belong to places through return labor, burial, and memory. Later states transform that belonging into political territory, but the emotional roots are older. A field matters because it has been worked. A house matters because generations have lived there. A river matters because it feeds, threatens, and remembers. A sacred place matters because people have gathered there beyond the needs of hunger. Kingdoms inherit these attachments and often redirect them toward rulers, gods, capitals, or dynasties. But they do not invent the human longing to place life inside a larger order. That longing is ancient, and it begins before the first throne. The world before kingdoms also leaves a warning about fragility. Early settlements show that complexity creates dependence. Food systems can fail, climate can shift, trade can break, disease can spread through density, inequality can deepen under stress. Leaders can become necessary and then dangerous. Abandonment can follow centuries of occupation. These lessons do not end with prehistory. They echo through every later civilization that rises, expands, strains its environment, and discovers that monuments cannot command rain. The first kingdoms may appear more powerful than the villages before them, but they are vulnerable to the same earth, water, soil, harvest, disease, and human trust. Perhaps the most important inheritance is the memory of alternatives. For most of human existence, people live without kings. They organize life through kinship, custom, seasonal movement, negotiated authority councils, ritual obligation, household autonomy, gift exchange, and shared knowledge. These forms are not always peaceful or equal, and they are not romantic escapes from hardship. But they prove that monarchy is not humanity's default condition. It is one arrangement among many born from particular pressures and possibilities. The world before kingdoms is not a failed world waiting to become royal. It is a vast archive of human ways to live together. By the time the first royal names enter history, the older world is already fading from official memory. Scribes begin counting grain for temples and palaces. Kings claim victories, build tombs, and trace authority into divine or ancestral pasts. Cities rise where wetlands, villages, and fields once spread more loosely. The long age of wanderers-gatherers, early cultivators, village builders, feast makers, ancestor keepers, and exchange travellers slips into the background. Yet without them, no kingdom could stand. They teach humans how to stay, how to store, how to remember, how to gather, how to trust beyond the household, how to shape land, how to make symbols powerful, and how to turn food into social order. The world before kingdoms is therefore not behind history. It is beneath it. It is the deep ground from which later history grows layer by layer, like a tell rising from rebuilt houses. On the surface stand kings, cities, temples and walls. Underneath lie hearths, grinding stones, buried skulls, wild seeds, worn paths, broken blades, shell beads carried inland, and the ash of fires lit by people whose names are gone. Their world does not need a crown to matter. It matters because it reveals the long human struggle to live with uncertainty before power learned to call itself eternal. And when the first kingdoms finally appear, they inherit not only land and labour, but the oldest human dream that a fragile community might endure beyond one season, one generation, one house, one harvest, and one life. And so, the world before kingdoms settles into the distance not as a lost age of silence, but as a low fire still glowing beneath the long story of civilization. Its people leave no royal speeches, no carved decrees, no lists of victories, no official portraits staring outward from palace walls. They leave smaller things, and in some ways more intimate ones. The curve of a blade shaped for a hand long gone, the dark stain of a hearth where food was shared, the hollow of a storage pit opened in hunger, the packed floor above a burial, the shell carried far from the sea, the seed that fell near a dwelling and began another season of return. Their world is difficult to see because it does not stand upright like a monument. It lies sideways in the earth, scattered, broken, patient. It waits in layers of ash, clay, bone, pollen, stone, and dust. It waits under fields, under towns, under river silt, under the floors of later cities that believed themselves to be the beginning of order. But order had older roots. Before kingdoms, people already knew how to remember. They knew how to gather, how to leave, how to come back, how to share, how to compete, how to mourn, how to mark a place as different from all other places. They knew that survival was never only a matter of food, it was also a matter of belonging. The first kings eventually rise with their sealed storehouses, priests, armies, and names. They inherit a world already shaped by countless unnamed hands. Yet beneath every throne remains the older human question, that no kingdom fully answers how to live together when the earth is generous one season, and cruel the next when memory binds people to places that may not last, when power promises safety, and quietly asks for obedience in return. The people before kingdoms do not disappear completely. They remain in the habits that continue after crowns are made in villages beside rivers, in fields planted after rain, in meals shared during uncertainty, in graves kept close to home, in roads that follow older paths, in stories tied to hills, springs, forests, and vanished shores. They remain wherever human beings build meaning from fragile things. Long before history writes the names of rulers, the world is already full of lives. Fires burn under open skies. Children learn the route to water. Elders remember places the young have never seen. Grain dries in baskets. Smoke rises from roofs. Footsteps cross land that will one day belong to kingdoms, though no one walking there yet knows the word. The night deepens, the ancient fields grow quiet, and beneath the sleeping ground the first human worlds continue to dream.